Man, doesn't look perfect. Like you're poaching stories, people or something. And I was like, oh yeah, he's on this thing. Okay. Can folks, are we muted?
They should be able to hear us.
Okay. Folks online, can you hear us okay? Okay, thanks. I see a
Yes.
thumbs up. Okay. Let's, if I should get Charity's on. Sorry if you hear us talking about you. We'll try not to say anything rude or inappropriate. Okay. How many more folks? Are we at critical mass? Should we? Yeah, we'll give a couple more minutes, settle in. We got 3 hours together. Grab some water. For those of you online, you're missing all the donuts. They're so good.
Yeah.
She's supposed to be here.
And I'll just say for those in the room, restroom facilities, women's is past the front desk down the hall, and the men's is essentially behind us here. 3 left.
If there's like a fire drill,
Out. There
That's
are hallways next to both the restrooms, so.
okay. In the case of a fire or emergency or fire drill,
The stairwell.
Stairwell.
Next to the restrooms.
then we're on the health floor. Okay, we'll give a minute or two.
Yeah.
Folks settle in.
Couple more people.
Okay, I wonder if I should log in so I can, well. We'll make it work.
I actually had the same problem. I was walking.
Okay.
And it said 800, 700, that's 808. I went,
And then there was Oregon versus Oklahoma.
right. So I eventually just went in this building and said,
Was there a different address on the
Yeah.
agenda?
Okay, that's my fault. I like, in haste, had like given him the address from like 15 years ago. and It popped out of my head.
I totally understand that.
It's weird, like, end of the day.
Yeah.
I think it was the beginning of the day, and I was like, I'm just gonna deal with this right now, and I got stuff to do.
Yeah.
Weird, when people put their cameras on, you don't see names, huh? That works?
Usually on my computer, I see their name.
Okay. And we see faces. All right, we'll start at 9:05. We're gonna see if we get anybody else in the room. I guess when I'm talking to people, I just look at the owl. Am I looking at, does it look like I'm looking at people if I'm looking at the owl?
It does.
Yeah, instead of this. Hey, everybody. Okay, that's gonna be interesting. I wonder if I should move things to that. That feels awkward.
Yeah, so you can just.
Yeah, then I look, it doesn't feel like I'm sideways at people. So rain is coming now? Is that what this means?
I believe so, yeah. She indicated to Ruchi that they were going to ride together, carpool.
Okay.
And neither of them is here, so.
Yeah, they're late. We're gonna get cozy up in here.
Yeah, apologies. I had like raved about our AV system downstairs.
We'll try to get it.
Yeah, we can try again.
All right, well, it is 9:05, so why don't we start? You want to close doors?
He had thought with so many people in here, we leave it
Sort
open
it
for
out.
circulation, but up to you guys.
I
We
think
got- we
there's
got
no
two-
secrets in here, so.
It's more about,
Recording and screening.
it's more about the disruption to
Oh,
staff that
yeah.
are trying to do their daily.
They have the doors.
Okay, so if we get
If they let us
scolded,
know.
Okay.
we get scolded or people start acting up, we're gonna close the doors and just keep boxing.
We're not letting anybody out. It's
Yeah, no,
an
exactly.
energy strategy.
So, come up with solutions to all the challenges.
At that point, no
complex
problem.
challenges. So let's jump in. So welcome to the folks in the room, hello folks online. Just throw in the chat if you have any challenges hearing or seeing us, or any technical issues, and Josh and team can help sort that out for you. This is our 10th meeting. I'm going to preface it by saying this is going to be an exciting meeting. And as I walk through some of the opening, really provide some guidance and expectations for how we engage in the conversation. We're really moving into a point of our process where we're going to start diving into some of the more meaty issues, some of the more complex issues, some of the issues that we know and we probably knew coming into this process. We're going to have very different points of opinion, right, and perspectives from the many interest-based groups around the table. And I'll come back a little bit to this when we get into kind of our group agreements, and then as we go through and preface some of the conversations today. So if we can go to the next slide. As a reminder, I always show this slide. You should know this by now. Mission, what the Department of Energy, Oregon Department of Energy does. I won't spend time on it, but just grounded in purpose. We can go to the next slide.
Okay, this is mine. Yeah, hey everybody, thanks for those who could come in person and for those joining us online. So I just want to tee up as we always do the meeting objectives. There are a few things that we want to accomplish in our time today. The first is in the last meeting we discussed strategies and high level policies, and we kind of shared a summary of that framing, and we talked about it, and we workshopped it with kind of in the room and online sticky notes, and you all added your thoughts, but we didn't have time to talk about what was there. And so we want to at least kind of summarize what we heard and what we read, and kind of throughout where we have identified things that we heard that we'll be touching on, we'll also lift that up kind of throughout. So we just want to have a little bit of a kind of recap of those conversations that we had in the last meeting. We've been, since we last met, we had a kind of a round of working group meetings, and we want to kind of describe a few changes that we've made since our last meeting. So we're going to focus on the changes and not kind of on everything that we talked about, but we want to bring some of those to the forefront and provide an opportunity for you all to give us some feedback. And then, as we said last time, we want to talk about some of the draft policy actions that we've been working on. So essentially what we're going to do is we've had those working group meetings, and we have essentially, for the kind of fourth round of working group meetings, the working groups kind of started by talking about barriers and then strategies. And then we took all of that and we structured the last meeting to say, okay, here are some policy actions that we think reflect a lot of what we've heard, and kind of we've applied our own kind of our own analytical lens to it, but it's really a reflection and a starting point for discussion. It's not yet like the draft that we're trying to get public feedback on. We're actually trying to get ideas to help us improve our thinking process. And so we're going to focus on a few of the policy actions that we presented to the working groups. And so this is where one of the things that we talked about, one of the functions of this group that we've talked about, is to help us with areas where there's not alignment or where there are particularly difficult issues. So we're going to bring those like tough issues to you today. And I hope that through the meetings that we've had, we've established an ability to talk about hard things in the room here. And so we're really hoping to have a conversation that's helpful to how then kind of solutions oriented around those policy actions. I think with that, I'm going to hand that to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So let's move to the next slide. So to support those objectives, older than I thought.
Yours.
It's small. It's objectively small.
Okay, so in the room, Josh, can you see if we can +1 that, like bring it up to like 100, like a 300% probably, maybe 150. However we can, yeah, that looks at least better. I mean, it's not gonna be perfect, but, we'll read through a lot of stuff. So we'll spend some time, we'll capture who's in the room. As we always do, we'll ask folks to affirm our previous meeting summary. We'll have some reflection back, so there's some takeaways from the last meeting, providing some updates to, as you have just described, the way we're going to frame up our conversation. And then we're diving into the discussion. A large part of today, most of today, is going to be in conversation to what Edith said. Right? Some of the issues are complex, that we know there's different opinions, and I will say it, Edith already said it, I'm going to say it, solution oriented. Right? I will say just right up the front, it's not necessarily valuable for the Oregon Department of Energy to hear all the things that you don't like. And I think they've done a good job of naming some of the challenges, some of the risks. Right? I think probably we could all presume many of the things that folks are coming into the room saying, I don't want to see this in this way and go in that direction. If that feels important for you to name at an outset, that's fine. But I'm really going to ask folks, one of our principals in Portland says, you've got to have some wine, some cheese with that wine. And so I'm going to really ask folks to get into a place where you're trying to provide some guidance, even if it's contrary to what someone else's guidance is, but providing guidance for what could work, right? Solution oriented. So I'm really going to challenge you all to get into that space to the best that you can. And it may be really difficult. It's okay that they hear contrasting solutions. That's fine. Really a chance for us as a group to start naming the things that could help us move forward, help trying to get to outcomes that will serve the state of Oregon, while also, of course, holding your specific interests and representation in your mind. So I will say that as many times as I need to, but hopefully it's landing on folks that part of why we bring these complex things and how we convene a group with the type of interest on this table is to kind of chew on this stuff and to advise the agency in the best way you can to try to mitigate where those risks are, try to lift up the things that are benefiting and try to find solutions to things that we know are really complicated challenges for our state and for the overall energy infrastructure. So at least for the people in the room, that sound all right? You're very good solution oriented. Okay, and I'll push you on it. What I'm going to try to have us avoid is we don't like that. I don't like that. This is a no starter. Okay? Like, say that to start. This is a no starter. But if we approach it like this, if we mitigated this, if we looked at it through this different lens. Okay, so I'm really going to look for that second part of any resistance. Okay, and then we'll get you out of here. We'll talk about next steps. Get you out of here by then. Okay. So next slide. So I'm not going to say too much more than I just did, but as we get into that solution-oriented mindset, that we're doing so with some real attention for yourself to listen to each other, to try to understand perspectives. It flows through all of these, being open-minded, asking questions, holding yourself accountable, really trying to create a space where we're seeking to resolve difference. To the extent that this group can seek common ground, right, that is an incredible gift to the Oregon Department of Energy. To the extent that we can. I will ask, of course, just be mindful of time. I think this group has done a really good job of sharing space and really encouraging a lot of folks to be able to bring their perspective in. Just know part of my role is if we're just kind of going down a road where the same people are saying the same things over and over again, I'm going to ask for others to invite folks in. And then for the folks online, certainly for the folks in the room, side conversations, please avoid, and let's try to avoid chat conversations. So let's, I'm going to run through the roster. You can take this slide down. You can see folks, to the extent that folks have their cameras on. See a lot of non-cameras on, so look at all those people popping on. Okay, let's start in the room. First, I'm gonna start with you.
Crystal Lightly at Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission.
Thank you.
Shannon Souza, Soul Coast Consulting and Design, and representing OSEA and OSHA.
Elaine Krauts, Energy Trust of Oregon.
Beth Baker with the Northwest Energy Coalition, sitting in for that.
Erin Child, Renewable Energy Alliance. Mary Moore,
Indicated with Stories Law Firm.
Peter Bayer, Oregon Department of Energy. I just want to also thank Chris and Crick for hosting us today. Really appreciate it. And if anybody ever wants to offer up a space where when we meet in person, it tends to be challenging to find a space. I really appreciate you offering.
We'll try again with the bigger.
Thank you.
I know a lot of other people have big rooms, so don't put it all on yourself. Ruchi Southier, Oregon Department of Energy.
Hey everyone, Brendan Capps representing Pacific Power.
Josh Price, Oregon Department of Energy.
Let's go, now maybe I'll just go back through alphabetical order. I don't know if I can see everybody. Aaron Olowski. Andrea, Ryan. Thank you, Andrea. Hello. Brian Adams. Kathy. You did something? Oh, look at that. Charity.
Hi, Charity Fain with Community Energy Project.
Thank you. Diane.
Good morning, Diane Brandt with Renewable Northwest.
You, your name, Ivy.
Did you say my name? Sorry, didn't hear you.
Yep, Ivy, I said your name and we see your name both.
Good morning. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm with QB Fabrication and Welding.
Okay, thanks, Ivy. Jen?
Good morning, Jen Bees with Port of Portland.
Jen Jolly, Jennifer Jolly?
Good morning. I'm sitting in for Scott Sims with the Public Power Council. I'm Jennifer Jolly with Oregon Municipal Electric Utilities.
Thank you. And with Jennifer Hillhart?
Jennifer Hillhart with the Oregon Citizens Utility Board.
All right, thank you. Joshua? There you go.
Good morning,
All right, Lauren?
I feel like Joshua wasn't coming through.
Yeah, Joshua, I want to try again. You're a little garbled.
Hi, you mean Joshua the positions.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're kind of cutting out.
Okay, I'll fix that.
Okay, thank you.
Feels like this is the time to fix that.
Yes, this is the time.
We expect you to talk later.
Yes, this is our, it's a good, what's that? Sound check.
Yeah,
I
sound
was like,
check.
what's the word? We're talking, you're hearing it? Down.
You're a good MC.
Thank you. Lauren?
Yeah, hi all. Lauren Link with the Nature Conservancy. Thanks.
Thank you. Patrick?
Here, good morning.
Thank you, Patrick. Shannon? Oh, sorry. I'm just- Sorry, Shannon. Tucker?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Tucker Bellman, Director of Government Relations for the Oregon Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Unfortunately, I'll have to leave you all a little bit before 10. I've got to drive up into Portland, and so I will put you on my phone and listen as we go, but I'm probably not going to be able to participate much. I will lean on Jennifer Jolly to speak on behalf of the COUs.
Thank you for the heads up. Tucker, did I miss anybody? Or someone join after we got through the alphabet?
That's it.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's keep going. We'll pull the slides back up. Sorry, Shannon, I get into autopilot, you know, Josh was just walking me down.
Well, there's two of me.
Down the line, yeah. So we can move from there. So as we do in every one of our meetings, we create some space to affirm our meeting notes and summary from the previous meeting. So I'll just ask if anyone has any edits, corrections, or additional notes. What was that chat that had my name on it?
Oh, I was asking, so Andrea had mentioned that it's hard to hear people who are further away from the mic, so I was wanting to make sure they could hear you, because I think you're the furthest, but if you're further away, speak up and towards the.
Should we move that owl closer to the middle?
Yeah, probably.
If it extends.
Oh, it can fly. Oh, yeah, well, fly. Good.
I know. Blowing on. At least they don't. Yeah.
If you talk, it's gonna come. So,
You can sneeze or move a little.
so for folks online, we'll try to project. Please just, sometimes my voice can sound like I'm underwater. People tell me. I think I sound great, but just let us know if you're having problems. And then, of course, for folks in the room, just making sure that we're not talking simultaneously because it can sound really poor for folks online. So any edits or notes? I'm not seeing any. Just a final reminder for folks online, of course, you use the raise hand button to get in the queue. For folks in the room, this is helpful, just a card up. So I know you want to speak. So with that.
Okay, so somebody wanting to say something? Okay, that was just background noise. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, I want to give a brief update just on where we are in the process to ground us all in that piece of it. So as I already mentioned, we just had a fourth round of working group meetings. So we kicked off the policy discussions in February, and we've been really busy kind of walking through our own thought process informed by the process that we designed for the working groups. As I said and you'll see in a moment, we have kind of a progression of how those conversations have built on themselves and gotten us to where we are today. And now we're kind of in between these two teal boxes in the middle. So we're still in May, but we're looking at June when we want to publish draft recommendations for written comment. And so we're getting closer to there and really getting to where we need to firm up our thinking. And so this meeting really serves to that purpose, to help us really work through, as I said, particularly the trickier issues that we're thinking through. So if we go to the next slide, it's funny, I have talking points and I never read them, but they help me think things through. So here's the progression of working group discussions that we've had just to help you. We've been engaging in different forums, not just in the working groups. But the way that we structured these working groups has kind of helped us design kind of where we are in the thought process over this time period between February and now. So we started with a plenary meeting. We focused on key model findings coming out from the modeling that Evolved Energy Research and the Clean Energy Transition Institute conducted for us. Then we broke out into the 5 separate working groups, and each working group kind of started to dig into their topic area. And the first meeting really looked at those key model findings. Each of the working group leads presented some information on where we are today in Oregon in these different areas. And then we started to talk about the barriers to, what's making it difficult to move towards where our policies are directing us to go. After the barriers, we had a following meeting that kind of built on that. We started to talk about strategies to address those barriers. And we had really active, some of you have been in these meetings, we had sticky notes and tried to make it very interactive and get as much as we could out of a virtual meeting. And then the last meeting, we really started to put some ideas for policy actions out there to start to iterate. And really, in a way, it just kind of having language out there is really helpful as a way to really force a discussion. And so, as I said, we haven't yet landed on what the policy actions are going to be, but we felt the need to just put some ideas out there that were concrete so that we could start iterating on them. Otherwise, we kind of risk remaining in the abstract. And we have a plenary meeting for the working groups coming up on the 21st of May, and that will really focus on a summary of the discussions that we've had across the working groups. We'll be in the middle of working on kind of getting to that June deadline, so we won't be ready to present anything new. We go to the next slide. Some takeaways, as I mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about the feedback that we heard in our last meeting together as a starting point, since there wasn't time to really read everything that everybody was putting up on the walls virtually and in person. So we see that the comments that we heard kind of inform the energy strategy in different ways. And our master note taker back here, Hugh, helped to kind of organize everything into sort of where the comments were landing in terms of the way that we're thinking about things. So some comments related to the energy strategy priorities overall. So we heard a lot about energy efficiency around the room. I think that might have been one of the strongest messages that we heard was support for energy efficiency to help us meet our goals. We heard quite a bit about kind of the regionality of our energy system. I just invented a word, I think.
Good word.
And we talked about affordability and cost allocation, and resilience and resource adequacy was coming up quite a bit too. We also had some comments on the high level strategy drafting. So that kind of level of, we presented 5 strategies and each of them kind of sets direction, but not much detail. And so we heard some comments around distributed energy resources needing to be framed more broadly. So not just kind of rooftop PV, but talking about, up to 20 megawatt facilities, like a little bit larger. So just to be more specific. We also heard some ideas around providing more clear and decisive language for the strategies approach on the kind of the way that we frame up each of the strategies. And we're working on that, although today we're not going to present anything because we're still collecting feedback to help inform that. We also heard some comments on the recommendations that we put up, a bit about more kind of precisely addressing regional coordination in electricity and transmission. I think that we were a little ambiguous with the language and there were questions around like, what are we really saying? And also more explicitly addressing equity when we talk about buildings, the recommendations around buildings. And then there were some comments that we saw, again, these are all the comments coming out of our last meeting together, that started to get into kind of that policy action zone. So kind of encouragement to consider cross fuels planning is an area that's really important. Providing communities with opportunities and clear path forward for development of distributed energy resources. We heard some interest in providing funding for demonstration projects for low carbon fuels. So those are some of the things that we didn't maybe discuss fully in the room, but that came up on the sticky notes. If we go, so this is just a flavor. This is not everything. There was a lot there. So if I'm not lifting up your comment, it's not that we haven't seen it. It's that I'm just trying to provide a little bit of a flavor. And then as we go through, there are opportunities to weave in what we heard on other sticky notes that we saw. So if we go to the next slide, this is just a reminder that I think it's important for us to recognize, and for you to know that Odo recognizes that there are many considerations involved when we think about the benefits and costs of different policies. And a lot of the comments that we hear are around these. They're around things like feasibility, land use considerations, natural resource impacts. I just want to be explicit here and say we, also impacts on not just on land, but on fish and on waterways. We heard a lot about energy burden and affordability, environmental justice. Resilience has come up at a community and a system-wide level. The importance of community benefits, and we've talked about economic and employment effects. So just a reminder that all of these are in our minds, and consider to inform kind of as we think through policy recommendations. I think what the bill asks us to do is to think about something that's really difficult. Like this is not easy, and nobody says it's going to be easy to meet the goals that our state has set. And so our job is really to do that hard thinking and think about the trade-offs and the costs and benefits. And how best to move us forward as a state. So we go to the next slide. So this is just a reminder of what we meant by strategy, because we've added a 6th one, you can see here. And so that's the main change that I want to highlight today. So last meeting, we talked about 5 strategies, and you'll see them on the next slide as a reminder of what they were. But I just want to remind us of kind of what we mean when we say strategies, the way that we framed up the conversation. So we now have 6 high-level strategies that represent the direction that Oregon needs to pursue to meet our energy policy objectives. Those objectives include reliability, affordability, resilience, and climate and environment. The strategies are framed as directional. They draw on results from the energy strategy modeling, as well as from the engagement that we've been undertaking over the past several months. And they're also organized around kind of key elements of our energy system. So looking at electricity generation, at buildings, transportation, fuels, and account for the interactions between each of those. And we're not trying to set a concrete goal in each of the strategies, but we do see one of the main one of the main things that we need to accomplish with an energy strategy is to set direction and where it's ambiguous to help set it more clearly. So if we go to the next slide. So the strategies 1 through 5, you can see this kind of work underway language that this is what we presented. Those 5 are what we presented last time. So we had to meet its energy policy objectives, Oregon must build on and advance policies that support these following 6 strategies. One of the comments we had was to have more kind of more specific language, and that's something we're working on as we go through today. If anything is triggered when we talk about more details, like this would be really good to see in the strategy, we'd love to hear that. So we have energy efficiency and electrification of buildings, electrification of transportation and reducing vehicle miles traveled, distributed energy resources, including solar PV, distributed batteries and flexible electric loads, also recognizing that there was a request to expand that a bit. So this is the language from last time, but I just want to recognize that we're thinking about that. Clean electricity, low carbon fuels, and now we've added a 6th, which is resilience. And we framed up resilience to include utility scale, community and customer levels. And this is a theme that we've really heard across the working groups, across written comments that we've received about the importance of making sure that our system is resilient with more extreme weather, with wildfires, with coastal communities who face more frequent and longer disconnections. So we want to make sure that resilience is really, we felt like it was missing when we just blended it into the others and wanted to extract it and put it out there as its own strategy for our state. And I also wanted to add that here at the bottom, you can see we've added something that we've also felt was missing and we heard comments about in our last meeting, which is implementation of each strategy must consider burdens and benefits to environmental justice communities, applying an equity lens to prevent, sorry, the cameras blocking the P, to prevent further disproportionate impacts to environmental justice communities. So thanks, Josh, to historically and currently marginalized communities. So we felt that it was important to be really explicit about that, and it gets lost when it's not on kind of the front page of strategies. So I want to go to the next slide because we have I think we have 3 high-level policy recommendations that go with that resilience strategy, and then we can have a discussion about this. So here are the 3 that we've come up with so far. So, and if you remember, each strategy has just really 2 or 3 recommendations. The idea of the policy recommendations is also to remain pretty high level at this point and to kind of frame up more specific actions. So we have here evaluate.
Edith,
Yeah.
for folks that are online, can you mute if you're not talking, please? Thank you.
Thanks. So we have evaluate cross-fuel interdependencies and build on existing processes to better align planning and optimize cross-fuel operations. This is something we've heard quite a lot about and that we're seeing some work regionally happening around this. And this is an area we'd like to dig into, support community-led efforts to enhance local resilience. So really interested to make sure that we come up with actions that facilitate that, and then promote adoption of small-scale rooftop solar and battery storage systems to support energy resilience for households and small businesses, especially in rural communities. So that's kind of the household focus. So I'm going to pause here because after this we'll transition into talking about more specific policy actions. I forget, Josh, if we have questions on the next slide or not. Do you mind just clicking one more to see? I can't remember if we teed up. No, so let's go back up and have a conversation about this. So I'm wondering whether, first of all, any reactions to the kind of the high level framing point and then to these more specific points, and then I'll hand it back to you.
Well, yeah, you asked the question. So I think there's kind of the initial takeaways, reflections, reactions, and then just any additional thoughts that you might offer to strengthen kind of what you see. Mary?
I just want to say I'm really pleased to see resilience being spoken about. That's, I mean, as a utility person, it's a big priority, but I think that's really important here. So I'm really pleased, and I'm curious to that end how this might interface with the state's sort of energy resilience planning. Is that taking that body of work also into this process?
Just to be sure, when you say resilience planning, are you thinking of our
energy security plans?
Energy security plan. I just wanted to make sure.
It's my favorite part of it. So bias you here.
Yeah. So we're talking. We're we're having a conversation with the team that leads up that work so that we can make connections between the energy strategy and that, because that I believe is annual. And the energy strategy is less frequent. And then we also have our biennial energy report. So yes, the short answer is yes.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I was just asking a clarifying question on one, or it's kind of hard to assess without knowing, some examples, or what are we talking about exactly? Is that number one, like gas and electric, or what are we talking about, I guess?
Yeah, I think a lot of the discussion that we've heard has been around gas and electric. We have kind of purposefully not just limited it to that. I mean, our energy security plan looks at liquid fuels, for example, and we're also looking at the intersection between the transportation sector and power sector, for example. So I think we wanted to keep it open to leave space for that to come into the conversation and not just limit it to electricity and gas. But there is that we do have electricity and gas in mind when we.
I was hoping so. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think one other quick thing on that is, I don't know if Brian is here from the propane side, but he's mentioned several times about how he works really closely with electric co-ops in a business model kind of way as well, to sort of have this type of cross fuel acknowledgement with propane as well. So he has said that before, so I wanted to just, he's here to say it.
Thank you. Let's go Andrea and then Aaron.
Yeah, is there any reason why on number 3, we're kind of limiting this to households and small businesses, whereas when you think about rooftop solar with battery storage and resilience, the opportunity to put it on, large scale distribution centers and the flat rooftops would seem to also fit in there. I don't know why. I'm not really sure why we're just limiting this.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. I'll say that I think I would have a question about whether that falls under number 2 and it's more of a community energy resilience focus, or maybe you can, I see you nodding no. So do you want to just elaborate a little bit on how you're thinking?
I think what I'm hearing, Andrea, is that it's just small scale, especially in rural, and only on households and small businesses versus the whole world of larger business rooftops.
Right. And it's so resilience, let's say you can do rooftop on some data center, right? I mean, that's a resilience effort for that. That's not a small business.
Yeah, thank you.
So I don't really see it as community led. It's more, I mean, I just see it for households, small and large businesses.
Yep. Got it. Thank you.
Shannon, were you wanting to comment on that specific piece?
Oh, wait, just put me in the queue.
Oh, yeah. So let's go Aaron, then Joshua, then Elaine, and then Shannon.
Yeah, I guess, echoing on Andrea, I think, I appreciate the 3 layers here in terms of like, hey, there's a system level need for resilience. Last January, we saw both the gas and the electric systems hitting peak. There's a community resilience, community resources, especially for folks who don't have the financial wherewithal to purchase their own resilient solutions. And then saying, hey, there's going to be some private individuals, whether those are homes or businesses, who will have needs. But I would say that 3 feels like it's artificially narrow in terms of presupposing the technology solutions that are relevant here and presupposing the types of customers who might be a priority for adoption. So if we are actively saying we don't want large businesses, or we don't want schools, or we don't want churches, or we don't want other individual community resource customers to have access to resilience, that is a choice for the state. I would also say it would be really nice to see us bring a much more forward-looking technology approach. We should be seeing microgrids coming on. We should be seeing V2G charging being a solution. I personally would love to see hydrogen fuel cells starting to show up. So just being really, if we want to get this level of specific in terms of what we want to see and what we don't want to see in those resilient solutions, if we can be a little bit more expansive about who might be targeted.
Thanks.
So I have Joshua, then Elaine, then Shannon, It looks like there's a couple comments in the chat. Maybe Jessica, you could lift up. Joshua? Not well.
Like every fifth syllable.
You might have to put, let's try, but we might have to put it in the chat. Yeah, I think that's gonna be the solution, unfortunately. So Joshua, if you could put it in the chat, that'd be great. Let's go, Elaine, I think you're next.
Yeah, I mean, just overall support for calling this out, but it does seem very much like a how, like we're gonna focus on those 4 strategies, and this is something that's gonna be very important throughout each one of them. But I guess also to the point of, it does feel like just sort of picking a couple things from those 4, maybe like these 3 specifically, might not be like ultimately the ones so we end up going forward with, but like it's figuring out in each of those areas, what is the most important aspect of resilience to bring forward. And so like electrification, strategic electrification, like making sure that resilience of energy system in totality is thought about. And I think that does come up in like the planning aspect there, but maybe it's up leveling of what are your priorities, or what's our overall, how we're gonna implement resilience. Cause it's all over the place. It's communities, but it's utilities. It's not. I don't know that I'm adding much, but I guess I'm just confirming a couple
It's
things.
also still an abstract term.
Right.
So it means things to different communities.
So I really appreciate these comments. So this level is meant to not yet get that specific, but I want to make sure that the way that it frames things, what you're seeing and what everybody commenting right now sees needs to fit under there can fit. So I'm hearing that we definitely need to reframe number 3 to broaden it to kind of be, if it's system, community, individual, then we need to define individual a little bit more clearly, or more inclusively. So it could be businesses, could be large businesses, small businesses, households. It also sounds like there might be some terms that, like we don't have the term microgrid in here, for example. So maybe there are some terms we want to put in here, but I will just say that we're trying to keep these specific enough to be directional, but then the policy actions that go under them are the ones that would speak to the role of emerging fuels or so also if you all have specific ideas of like policy actions or something that gets closer to that, would love to hear it too.
Do your follow-up, Aaron.
I was just gonna say, one thing I'm also reflecting is I don't think we have a definition of resilience at this point. So whether it's, anyway, in addition to like, what are we trying to achieve with resilience, whether it's restoration, preservation of life, just.
Yeah, thanks.
So let's go Shannon, then Zach, then Juan. Then there's some chat, and then Chip. Okay, so Shannon.
Sorry, I'm going back to 3, so I'm like a +1 on the previous comments, and then I'm also gonna hook on rooftop. Increasingly, our designs, we're seeing there's a lot of appetite for specifically in the resilience space, because now we can design them for clean rainwater catchment. Water supply is a critical issue, and as a sheltering space for people during extended outages, put temporary tarps up on the sides or anything like that.
It's also too narrow on the technology side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some themes emerging here, Zach.
I had a different topic, so I want to let whoever wants to talk about resilience go before me.
If that's your preference, we'll come back to you. Juan?
Yeah, I just want to, as a context, it is a proposal. Hopefully nothing has changed, although everything is in flux with GC. It's the coalition, the PowerRise, with has an NSF grant designed to create and support the development of microgrids on the state, battery energy storage solutions, new forms of electrification, something to consider, because when it comes down to resilience, we need to figure out how we can support those homegrown technologies giving the incentives to be able to get to market, right? The challenge we see in that proposal is that going to small rooftop solars or battery solutions for homes and small businesses. At the moment, I gotta be honest, that technology is unaffordable for all of them without the right incentives. So talking about policy, how we can find or encourage our legislature to create incentives for those technologies to be adopted for a small business or for home use. But that is like a 5-10 years away from happening. It will continue with the same path without any incentives. The exploration to incentivize the implementation of solar or battery energy storage solutions for medium-sized to large businesses is more viable at the moment, in collaboration with the utilities, with all the utilities partners they're in the room. So that's the missing part of number 3. How we can take a more patient, long-term view of how we're going to implement this long-term to be able to get it to market and reduce the cost of manufacturing or the price point for people that the community we want to target to be able to use it right away. At the moment, is no viable commercial path for us to be able to say 3 years from now, 4 years from now, these small businesses or households will be able to implement that. And we have some homegrown companies. Skip Tech has developed technology that's viable. Energy storage solutions are in Wilsonville. They have a commercial viable battery energy storage solution for large form factors. So maybe we can start looking into those, just as a context for everybody.
Yeah, and then it looked like, Jennifer, your comment, I mean, I think one, you're merging kind of the direction conversation and the policy conversation. And so it's kind of a blend of both that this group will also be having to navigate. If you wanted to see, can you catch us up on any chat? Joshua, I hope you were able to put your comments in the chat. So maybe that's one of them. I thought I saw Ivy in there.
So Joshua did indicate, and I think Joshua's gonna try and call in on his phone for his audio, so I don't know if that's happened yet, but Joshua, if you are able to call in on your phone, we'll try and promote you so you can come off mute. But he wrote that he agrees that the point that people are making, that number 3 feels narrow, and he just made the additional point that when we enumerate technologies, it can be read as a complete list. And so I just wanted to flag that from him. And then Ivy had a really good point in the chat, which is solar panels are largely, the components of solar panels are largely manufactured in China, and that could have potential implications for the costs, the upfront costs of being able to install solar in there. And Ivy, if you want to come off mute and add anything to that, I can pause for a second.
Thank you so much. So I kind of want to just kind of piggyback on that concern, because even before all the things are happening right now, the new administration and the tariffs, talking about it, I even thought about getting my facility to be solar panel too at the very top for a 30,000 square feet facility. And when you're talking about, hey, it's affordable, like $700,000, I'll give you guys a real number, $700,000 to cost to implement, to order all the solar panels, over hundreds of them, just to kind of make it efficient and to also consider maintaining that too. So homes and businesses need to maintain solar panels, and you're having to use deionized water to maintain that, you know? So it's something that really needs to be a little bit more thought out about it, because $700,000 to me is pretty expensive for a small business. And yes, I would get that money back eventually, but it's a lot of front loading too to get that efficiency. And just something for you guys to kind of understand that I think that number 3, it's a little bit narrow in my personal opinion of looking at it and knowing what costs I'm looking at on a business aspect already. And then number 2, I would say if there's a way to probably broaden out the support community-led efforts to enhance local resilience, just maybe there's some things that we could actually add in about transmission towers too about that. Because I think that without without having all these renewable energies, we need transmission towers at some aspects to make this helpful because of the upgrades of all the data centers that's happening as well too. We can't utilize current existing infrastructure.
Thank you. Where does that fit, like the transmission piece, like in the strategies?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot, I'm just gonna say first off, there's a lot of cross-cutting areas. So right now where it sits, but recognizing Ivy, your comment is a really good one, that part of resilience is actually beefing up kind of the connections, the transmission system, the distribution systems, the lines. It's more when our working group, and I would say the way that we're thinking about the recommendations are kind of structured around enabling development of electricity generation and transmissions. It's kind of the utility scale section where we have where we're nestling the recommendations.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. So let's go Tim, then Zach, then look at Charity. Yep.
Thanks, Tim McMahon here. I am really glad as we're looking at the resiliency questions that fuel interdependence is number one. I don't know if that's number one is the number one most important thing, but there's a whole lot, to unpack with this one, including kind of the current legislative antipathy toward natural gas and whether or how or if natural gas fits into this discussion in this environment. I think I think we just really need to have a really open and honest conversation about that. And then what I do for a living is I permit energy facilities, and there is growing opposition to everything. And so this is only getting tougher and tougher. We're dealing with pending legislation that is aimed at basically killing Oto's opportunity and legal responsibility to permit utility scale facilities right now in the legislature in the midst of climate. I mean, it's kind of nuts. But it is a raging battle right now, and it's very uncertain whether the state's going to win this. Say the Department of Energy in the state is going to win this one because it's a really major deal. So I'm just kind of pointing these out as constraints that I think we really need to dig into and be honest about as we continue proceeding.
I think when we get into some of the both the direction and then start to get into the policy, I mean, that's part of the next part of our discussion today is really looking at the challenges, barriers, and risks that exist, and are there solutions for it? I don't know if the solution is win the case, but part of the discussion we really need to have is both, to your point, being honest about what are the constraints, barriers, and risks that exist, and are there solutions that this group can put forward that do not just set direction, but actually start putting some policy objectives on the table. So thank you for naming it. So Zach, then Charity.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to lift up the other change that I think I heard you describe, Edith, when you were introducing, in addition to the resilience piece, adding in the environmental justice community language as kind of a overarching piece under all the strategies, above all the strategies. I think that's really important, and also I'm super interested in seeing how that then flows for the policy actions, and so look forward to that as we dive into the policy actions piece, but just wanted to express appreciation for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zach. And I think Oto's been calling it the flower, right? Image that Edith showed earlier, and so EJ being one of those conditions or considerations, but also just naming, as was on the first slide, kind of underlying all of this around the vulnerable populations, EJ impacts. Charity?
Yeah, I didn't want to talk specifically about these three goals, but more about a process of how you go about setting strategy and goals. I do that a lot in my work. And what I am already hearing on this call that is a little concerning to me is jumping too quickly, too fast to barriers when we're not at that stage. If we can't put out on paper what we want to see as an aspiration, as a long-term goal to reach what policies we already have in the state around carbon reduction, if we're needlessly self-censoring ourselves right now in this exercise because we're afraid of a lawsuit or afraid of costs are real, I 100% get that. we're already doing small scale rooftop solar on low income households in my org. So I totally know the barriers. But if we sit here in this and only talk about, well, this policy might be great, but it's too expensive, and cut it out at this stage because of those barriers, I caution us to not do that, because if we can't set out what we see as a vision and goal right now, then we can't get there. You know, in this state, their legislature is discussing, you know, money for a baseball stadium when we don't even have a baseball team. And that's millions of dollars. So I don't want to think about, yeah, we can't, if we can afford a baseball stadium that we don't necessarily need or want or have a team for, then why can't we think about what we need energy policy wise? And then once we know what those are, yeah, Juan, you just wrote, long-term vision shouldn't be hindered by current restrictions. And they are there, and I know it because I do this work every day. But that's not what we're doing right now. We are trying to set what our ideals should be. So please, like, yes, when we get to a point where we're in a rulemaking process or we're in an implementation process, then we have to really be looking at what those barriers are, or we need to be mindful of them while we set this. But I don't want to see this process self-censor because of fear. So that's what, just kind of what I want to refocus on a little bit.
And thank you for the analogy, Charity. I think that we're able to invest $800 million in a baseball stadium that we don't have a baseball team agreed to come over, but there's the shiny object there. We should be able to craft a narrative of what we need, the investment we need to do for a region that has a more meaningful impact than eating hot dogs and take me to the ballpark, right?
All right, so thank you, Juan. I'm gonna get us off the baseball channel.
Can I say one thing?
Is it baseball
I'm
related?
gonna start with a baseball joke, but yes. Well, I was just telling Brandon that I think the only way that that baseball team will come is if we call them the Wet Sox. Yeah. It's not my joke, but I love it. It brings me back.
Thanks for the levity.
Okay, so I just want to say, Charity, and I saw some of the agreement in the chat. I'm really inspired by what you're saying. I think you're right. I also think that we need to have an honest conversation about risks, because it's difficult to sort of prioritize with limited resources. And we also want to think strategically about, like, what can we do first? What do we need time for to develop? So I think I hear you on that. I also want to just say I want to hear the risks so that we can think about them. So I think it's like, yes, and I guess to what Ben was saying before.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna talk about baseball. Although maybe there's a solution oriented to think about the equivalent of a jock tax. I don't know how to show that. I just wanted to get that into the public record. Yeah, Charity, I think, and I think this conversation has been pretty illustrative around this, you know, there's kind of the broader legislative direction, kind of what we're kind of tasked with achieving as a state, and then holding this distinction between high-level direction and the policies that we're gonna have to grapple with. And so, you know, I do think that we need to be able to land. What I heard a lot of is expanding and being more inclusive, and broadening the direction, to make sure that it's a bigger umbrella that more things can fit into. So for me, right, that feels like folks really saying this is a good direction, right? I think, Mary, your first comment was, I'm glad to see this here, to have resilience. And a lot of this conversation has been, how do we make that something that we can all see our work and our ideas falling under? At the same time, I think you're also getting a preview of where the complexities of how we define and put into reality what resilience actually means. And you're getting a preview of some of those gaps, barriers, constraints, and challenges. We're going to have, you know, basically the rest of our conversation centered in those challenge spaces. So this is the conversation, but I do want to, you know, be able to have this group hold both. Charity, I think to your point, and some of the others that agree, it's like we have to be able to that direction, and then we can argue about how do we kind of align with that direction. What's a realistic way, if that's the way to say it, to actually get us moving towards that. Erin?
Yes, agreement with all of the things. I want a little +1 on having a long-term ambition and being able to say, okay, and here's where we start. I think one of the things on resilience that I would flag is just, I think this is a space where we are still figuring out the realm of the possible and what the potential solution set looks like. And so I also don't want us to set a long-term vision, start marching towards that, and then realize like the ball has moved. And I think for hydrogen, we feel that very acutely. The technologies I'm working with today are not the ones I'll be working with in a year, candidly, or 2 years. And so recognizing the limits of our ability to look forward. And I think with resilience, one of the big pieces that I haven't heard from folks yet is our outlook on climate change and how that's going to be impacting outages and wildfires and a whole bunch of other extreme weather events that will change the way that communities are impacted and change the value that resilience provides. And so to whatever extent we want to like really dig in on resilience, just making sure that we are acknowledging that there are some bigger pieces moving that resilience is going to have to be tracking against.
Good, thanks, Aaron. But I think that, you know, maybe that's part of the defining of resilience and really putting some language around it. That makes sense, Jessica.
I think we're at the end of our time, so I just wanted to round it out by saying that earlier in this discussion, both Jennifer Jolly and Diane Brandt flagged that they were concerned that reliability was shown in the flower diagram, and this gets to resilience, because I think reliability and resilience cross a little bit when you talk about at the utility scale system. And I just wanted to flag that couple things. It's not just in that flower. Reliability has underpinned everything that we've done in the energy strategy from the beginning. The model that we developed required reliability as part of the way that it would find a path forward. So all the data that we have includes that. However, we know that some of the policy options that are out there could have implications for reliability of the grid or reliability of energy systems overall. So if those things come to mind, we do want people to flag those for us, provide us with information on it. But just to be clear, that reliability was a central piece of the work that we did to form the energy strategy.
That's great. And thanks for naming the time. So that was a great conversation. And even within reliability, right, there's the kind of climate, weather-related reliability. Somebody had talked about security, energy security, right? So there's, even within that, there's a number of different.
Yeah, maybe I can just say one more thing, because I think maybe it's not entirely said. So Charity, I appreciate your comment. I think so what the legislature has asked us to do here is to look at our existing policy objectives and identify pathways to meeting them, recognizing that we may not be on the path to meet them because we have some pretty ambitious objectives, and the objectives that we have that are just standard energy sector affordability, reliability are also challenged right now. And I think depending on which sector we're looking at, you know, I think for the electricity sector, we have pretty strong objectives for transportation too. We've set pretty ambitious objectives, and the challenge is like, how do we get there? And so a lot of the discussion is around the how, because in a way the kind of the trajectory has been set, and then the challenge is the how. Buildings are a little different. We don't have a state buildings policy. We have policies that nudge. And so that's an area where maybe we need more clarity. And I think we'd be really happy to hear from the group kind of what that clarity that's needed would look like to help us. And I think the way that we've structured some of the discussion around policy actions today, I think starts getting at the heart of the policy actions are almost like besides the point. They're there to give us something to look at, but you'll see we've set up the slides, and I'm like almost transitioning us into the next section, but you'll see the slides are structured around what we see as the barriers to meeting our objectives, what we would expect an action to help us achieve, and what the risks are that we see of the idea that's there, kind of recognizing the full picture and trying to get us towards kind of more specificity, particularly in the areas where there's ambiguity. So I think there are kind of two buckets of like where we need more vision. One is the how, and the other is like, do we have a direction or are we still missing it? So I think really encourage folks to help us think that through. And then looking back at how we've structured the pathways and the high level policy recommendations, those are meant to define the direction. And so if something's missing there, then we'd really like to also hear, like, if you think something's missing in the way that we framed up the pathway for fuels or buildings or electricity, like, and there's a word that we could add or a concept that we could try to capture. And that high level framing, I think that's really useful. So just encourage, like, throughout the conversation, feel free to like give your comment and then nestle it within like, this would be great to see here or there. All right, I just wanted to say that because I think that might be helpful to just like get us closer to understanding how we're thinking about things.
Okay, so let's begin our transition. Ivy had a question in the chat. I don't know if that was, Ivy, was that just a point of curiosity around the cost of a power outage, or was that kind of a substantive ask to see if?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious because we're talking a lot of different things here already, and they're really good. And just kind of like to have a stronger stance on it when this is, going to be drafted and recommended, right? Is to kind of understand like also how much does it cost? Like when we do have power outages, how much does it cost for all of us? And I do think that when we talk about resiliency, someone did mention about like having to address about the climate change and all of that. That is definitely a big factor for everyone's concern. And I think that's a huge forefront priority.
That's great. So if there's a way to calculate kind of the cost avoidance if you have a resilient system that doesn't result in power outages.
And I think that's a great question. We'll flag for our energy security plan team to see if they have data.
Value of loss of load study is the key phrase you're looking for.
Got it. Thank you.
Ooh, a bit of my brain. I can press somebody sometime and that's a value loss load study. Thank you, Aaron. So let's we're going to kind of pivot now, and we'll get a start on this, and then we'll build a break into the conversation. Edith, you want to tee us up?
Yeah, so I want to just another thing that we didn't frame up last time that I think is important to frame up while we're still kind of at that kind of high level is there are kind of two ways that we have been talking about and working to incorporate equity and environmental justice principles into the energy strategy. So Zach, you spoke to that text that we added to the slide that has the strategies. But I just want to raise awareness and see if there are any comments to this, to how we're thinking about it. So we had an environmental justice and equity working group. And throughout the process, we actually applied what you see here, which is that we kind of need an umbrella framing to make sure that we are applying consideration of equity and environmental justice, kind of considerations into policies as we go to kind of guide the thinking and remind us of kind of how we can make sure to continue to push on that. And at the same time, it's really important to incorporate or embed, hence the bed, kind of specific concepts into actual policy ideas. And we need both. So kind of throughout the process that we've had with the working groups, we've tried to have a practice of doing this. We have a group that where we have in-depth discussion and bring what we've heard from the other working groups, and then we discuss it in the environmental justice and equity working group. And then we've also tried to make sure that there are voices in the other rooms talking about generation and transmission or buildings or fuels, so that we can also make sure that those perspectives are being shared in the room. When there's a policy recommendation, somebody can raise their hand and say, it would be great to include this consideration because otherwise you're going to leave people behind. So this is part of how we're thinking of when we think about how to structure policy recommendations, we think about having both elements, and we don't yet have elaborated the umbrella piece, but we're working on some language that would kind of help frame up what a matrix might look like a guidance, a kind of matrix / guidelines. But we are also working actively to embed, and you might see this here and there in the language that we have, kind of specific and explicit concepts into the recommendations too.
Edith, have we defined that for the group? Or is there, maybe it's an open question for the group, or it's a question for Odo, is the definition of environmental justice and what we should expect people to be utilizing?
We have used, and I will not be able to quote it, maybe somebody in the room can. We've been using a definition, like a commonly used definition in our state that I think comes out of the Environmental Justice Council's work.
In 4077.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Which is an expansion of what it was previously.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody can do some quick Googling.
I'm gonna throw it in the chat right now.
And one other piece to just build on what Edith was saying, I know, and our colleague Lauren has been leading up this work, but there's procedural elements where like ensuring voices are heard, but also that policies and outcomes that we are thinking about have some ability to measure or metrics associated with the idea that we're moving forward, that we're making improvements around equity. So there's sort of like an interest in getting a little bit more detail in like both ways. Like how do we bring in more voices and have education and like sort of level playing field of conversation, but also like what kind of measurements can we use to ensure that our work is sort of progressing in that space.
That's good. And I know, just as an aside, that Oregon has a pretty expansive definition that includes not just demographics, but adds kind of rural and remote population, people with disabilities, elders, youth, like, so it's a much more expansive definition than you might find in other states as well.
Yeah, really appreciate the attention to this, and guess just wanted to follow up on the idea of Edith, you mentioned maybe a matrix that you all might be working on. Can you say a little bit more about like process for that, timing for that is?
Yeah, so this is an area that we feel is important to spend a little bit of time with our environmental justice and equity working group kind of co-creating before we put it out. So I don't think the timing will be the same as it will be for the other policy recommendations. We need a little bit more time to work on this, but I can say that and I don't know if Lauren is here and wants to chime in, but one of the things that we've been looking at to help us think through how we might structure a matrix is Washington's energy strategy. They have a matrix that presents some guidelines on kind of how to incorporate equity and environmental justice principles into decision-making in the energy sector. So that's, we might be able to drop a link into the chat so that other people can see that, and maybe with a page number, because it's kind of a big report. Sorry, that might be a tall order on the fly, but maybe and we have talked about it a bit in that working group, and we have the slides from the environmental justice and equity working group meetings on our website. So you may not want to listen to the whole recording, but if you glance through the slides, you can see how we've been setting it up and the ideas that, like, where the idea generation has landed so far.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Edith, one point of clarification, did you say that it draws inspiration from Washington's CEIP?
Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
Thanks, Brian.
So this is just a reminder of the structure. It is conceptual. The boxes don't exactly match up. Each strategy doesn't have exactly 2 policy recommendations, but you'll remember we showed this last time. And I'm just showing this to remind us of where we've been hanging out up until now today. So we've been hanging out in like the strategy and high level policy recommendations space. And what I'd like to do is transition us to the policy action space where we haven't yet hung out together. So, but we have been with our working group. So that's kind of just the purpose of this slide. And also I think it helps conceptualize how you might expect the draft recommendations to be structured. So this is just, everybody's brain works differently. Mine works like this. So I drew stuff for myself and thought maybe we should share. So this is just kind of a transition to say, now we're going to go into more detailed specific policy actions that nestle within kind of the policy recommendations and higher level strategies. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to now move us on to policy actions. And Ben, I'm going to do a time check and see whether we want to get into it. We want to take a little break
Why don't we
beforehand.
just take a little break, and then just dive in and really just embrace the moments together.
The deep end.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I can really smell those donuts. It's really fun.
Yeah. Less than 10 minutes, is that fine? We'll come back at 10:24?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thank you. y'all got 3 extra minutes, so hopefully you made the most of it. Got that one like stream email out or whatever the heck you were up to. Let's dive right back in. So Edith.
Okay.
You want to introduce?
Oh, welcome Mary Kyle.
Hi.
Folks.
I was at the address given for the meeting.
Oh.
Which is an empty building. That's okay.
That was a test.
Right, I was gonna be late anyway. I wasn't pretty one.
I was like, that was a long time to be wandering. Mary Kyle.
No.
Okay. Well, welcome, glad you made it to the space. Yes, all right, Edith.
All right, so I'm going to lead in with a picture of ice cream to symbolize the flavors of policy actions that we see emerging. So the policy actions are meant to be specific, measurable, and achievable as much as possible. So we're trying to get as specific as we can here, and really the policy actions are meant to serve to overcome specific barriers that have been identified with help from the engagement process, and to match up with that kind of directionality that we've set in the higher level strategies and recommendations. So there are 4 flavors of policy actions, and you can decide which is, you know, mint chocolate chip, strawberry, chocolate, and vanilla. Build on some policy actions build on existing programs or authority. Some create a new policy or program. There are some areas where we see broader state direction or support being helpful. So not necessarily something new, but it could be a continuation of something or us signaling something to inform the broader dialogue. And then there are areas that a further study to help inform decisions. This is complicated stuff and we don't always have the information we need. And so we're trying to identify strategically where we need to know more and just define that and set it up. Okay, so those are the 4 flavors: existing, new, broader direction, further study. Go to the next slide. So there are 2 parts to the conversation, the first few slides are going to be specific policy actions that were informed by working group discussions and other engagement where we'd like your input. And again, we're focusing on areas where we see misalignment or hard questions being asked. So these are places where we're not necessarily going to agree around the table, but we're trying to tee it up in a way that hopefully will help us have a productive conversation. And then in our earlier conversation before the break, we started to hear some things like, what about the effect of tariffs and inflation and rising prices for things? And so we have kind of 3 broader areas that we're struggling with a little bit on what the role of the energy strategy should be in like the broader context of we're in a current legislative session in Oregon. There's a lot of changes at federal level. So we want to tee some of that up and I want to make sure we have time for that. And I realize that we're a little behind schedule. So I think we're going to start rolling through the policy actions and we'll see kind of where we land. We'll do a time check partway through. And if we have to, we might need to tee a couple up and like bundle the discussion rather than going one by one. Our original idea was to go 1 by 1 through 5 policy actions. So this is a preview of the conversation we're about to have. Next slide. So we have one main question for the discussion, which is how do we maximize benefits and mitigate risks of policy action? So each action kind of serves to help us get to where our current policies tell us we need to go. You know, we're looking to overcome barriers, but in the way that it's framed, considering the barriers that we're looking at and the risks, you know, there's kind of a benefit risk space no matter what we put on the table. And that's the space where we want to have the conversation, recognizing that there's both. Nothing here is easy. If you go to the next slide, I think I'm going to tee up the first one. Sorry, what was before that? Oh, okay, and it's just a reminder of considerations when thinking through it. So does this, you know, for example, does this policy action address the intended barrier, or should we be going about it differently? If not, what revisions might we make to better align with the barriers we're seeing? We have in bullets here kind of what you saw in the earlier flower, you know, these considerations of cost, feasibility, energy burden, the others that you see on here. And then there's also a question that we are thinking about how can we be as efficient as possible and how we go about doing what we need to do. So do we have existing resources, programs that we should be leveraging? We don't want to create something new where we have something existing that we can build off of. So this is almost like the administrative efficiency bucket. that I think is really important, particularly because I think we're increasingly squeezed also as a state. So we're squeezed all around, including at the, at the level of state resources. So if we go to the next slide, this is going to be the first one. So this one is relating to integrated planning, which we already talked about a little bit. So there are kind of challenges and barriers that we have heard when we've talked about the current way that gas and electric utility planning is conducted. So I'm just gonna touch on what's in these points. So first of all, each of these slides will be similar. So we have challenges, barriers, expected function, and outcomes of the recommendation, and risks. So the policy action we have up here is integrate electric and natural gas resource planning to support a timely and orderly shift to electricity and clean fuels that prioritizes an equitable transition and explicitly includes environmental justice communities. There's a lot that's not defined in there. So one question might be, how do we go about this? But I just want to speak to and kind of focus our conversation around the rest of the slide, which is, there's the challenges we observe. There's not a long established history of dual fuel planning across different service territories, customer bases, and and there's different utility resources and staff capacity. We have 41 electric utilities in our state, and they have a range of kind of sizes, capacities, et cetera. There's not an existing process for utility to utility or utilities coordination to occur. We have our investor-owned utilities that operate a certain way. We have our consumer-owned utilities that operate in different ways. Both electricity and natural gas systems face challenges. So I forget who mentioned January of last year. I think it was Aaron, but both systems were under stress. So that's kind of another challenge that we see. And the energy transition fundamentally requires coordination across these sectors, because increasingly we see kind of a lot of electrification and just a lot of overlap between sectors that historically hasn't been there. So what's the expected function of integrating planning? What we're looking to accomplish is to enhance reliability, reduce costs through better operations across systems and coordination, help inform utility investments by highlighting opportunities of highest value for natural gas powered electricity, non-emitting electricity, and other fuels, and just have greater visibility to navigate a managed transition that minimizes stranded assets. There are risks here. We already have elaborate long-term planning processes. There's a lot that goes into integrated resource plans, clean energy plans, distributed system plans. So there's a lot already happening. So this is like another layer of complexity. It adds work for a lot of utilities, and a lot of our smaller utilities may not have the resources. So how we'd be interested to hear like how this could work for them. And there's also an information sharing element here, where we wouldn't need reasonable protections if we're talking about sharing sensitive information across utilities. So I'm gonna just stop, and we have about 10 minutes to discuss this, give or take.
And I wonder, Josh, if you can blow it up so the green, because ultimately everything under that is contextual. And either just walk through that. So as you're thinking about kind of a policy action, right? Is that the right way to say it, team? Right? That's kind of in the aqua, whatever color that is. Really think about benefits and mitigating risks, right? So again, so Mary, let's start with you.
Absolutely, and I would say this is something that I know the gas system I think is a really important priority, especially as we look at big winter events when closer coordination could reduce those strains that both systems are experiencing. So I think this is something that we're very interested in. I will also note that we had this sort of list of this is an enhancement to existing policies and needs. Yes, I also think that to do this really well as a state, or for any state to do this really well, that additional study will be necessary. So I think this would be a big move, but one that I think is extremely important. We see in some regions that have consistently colder weather. I'd say Quebec, which is not the United States, so slightly different situation going on there. But there's been some coordination between Hydro-Quebec and Énergir to make sure that instead of having to build more generation resources to meet winter peak, they're able to coordinate in-home hybrid heat systems. So that's not having to put more gas generation instead of having direct use, right? That's a solution that has reduced emissions and has benefited both the gas and electric system. Different politics for sure, I know it's Canada, but I think those kinds of close coordination that are possible mean that we find solutions that work best for everyone and are most cost effective. So very exciting, very promising. It is an addition, but I don't think it's necessarily so huge a negative lift. I think it is an illuminating addition. And so maybe it's more of a resorting of the current requirements and policies rather than just adding additional layers. So I mean, there's a lot of receptivity, I would say.
So to just use the phrase additional study, is that just looking at exemplars like Quebec, or is that like what would be the components or?
Definitely, I think the case studies, there's actually not any state in the United States doing comprehensive joint system planning right now. And would be cool if there was. I think that's definitely an ideal. So looking at case studies, but I think also honestly looking in our own region across the utilities that are serving Oregonians and identifying the overlaps and opportunities. So I think there's some need for engagement across the utility space.
Awesome. Aaron and then Shannon.
Echoing Mary, I think first and foremost, yes, please, thank you. You know, for hydrogen, we are kind of caught in the middle between the gas and electric sectors. And so, you know, Northwest Power and Conservation Council load forecast came out. They're expecting that about half of the region's hydrogen needs are going to come from grid connected hydrogen assets. And the rest will come from electric gas or somewhere like magic hydrogen out of the universe, right? Which is my least favorite way to think. Yeah, exactly. It's the most abundant atom. We'll just, yeah. So that makes it really hard for our industry to be taken seriously, to plan seriously, to think about the actual infrastructure needs, which, you know, are the big challenges here. I think the two sort of pieces that I would pick at here, I love that we're getting equity and environmental justice into this discussion. I would frame this maybe more as like disproportionate impacts or localized impacts. I think we have all been thinking about the folks who are going to get caught in these pinch points, but I want to make sure that we're not, while our environmental justice communities certainly do need and deserve extra care and feeding, I don't want us to be like, well, these 5 communities are EJ, and so we work on them, and there are, you know, everyone else falls by the wayside just because of how we define this. I would say the other thing, as Oregon starts to contemplate really a restructuring of its utility planning paradigm, Washington has some really interesting integrated system planning legislation that was passed last year, primarily focused on PSE because they are a dual fuel utility and figuring out sort of how they work through this. California has also been doing just a massive overhaul of their planning structure under the CPUC. And the biggest challenge that was coming out of that process is as we ask our PUC to step into additional responsibilities, ownership, coordination, making sure we have a healthy balance between an integrated state system and resource availability and creating flexibility for individual utilities to pursue the tools and resources that their community needs and wants, because, you know, presumably we say there's a gap in what's happening, which means that somebody needs to do something differently and probably many somebodies. And so how do we identify those needs and still create local agency and ability to sort of drive these things? Thanks.
Don't ask a follow, but I'll go Shannon, jump in.
Yes, I love this overarching statement, and I think that we would all benefit from expanding the table here and flexing into industry and looking at what Denmark, for example, has done around industrial symbiosis. Increasingly in my practice, I'm working on energy resilience and integrated resource plans, whether that's for a community, a tribe, or a utility. In each of those cases, the question about the fuel decarbonization is very much informed by the resources that are within that trust land or county or service territory. So I think that there are some economies of scale, looking at industrial symbiosis. Let's take hydrogen, for example. We know we love it. We know it's really expensive to store it. So it makes sense to make it where you're gonna use it. And if you can flex into industries, manufacturing industries that are already using it, so much the better. It takes away some of that risk and it helps to solve the question of, oh, which decarbonization path are we going to go down for the fuels?
Can I ask a dumb question? So where does hydrogen fit in this?
Currently, hydrogen is not a regulated commodity product, which I think is an excellent point of discussion for folks after you finish working on this. I think what Shannon is flagging is that there are a lot of people who receive energy and use energy outside of the regulated utility structure. And so if that is Odo's remit, figuring out how Odo's remit bumps up against the PUC remit in terms of those regulated. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, actually, I was going beyond the energy uses for the fuels and looking at the manufacturing, the transportation uses for the fuels, and also what the fuel sources is. Biogasification is really important to a lot of our rural communities who all of a sudden have all this biomass they're trying to take out of their wildfire prone, you know, or juniper management, you know, so electrification might make sense in some cases and renewable diesel might make sense for this community. So I think that there might be kind of a bottom up approach that complements the utility top down, if you will, and then kind of meet in the middle.
Jessica, were you adding a?
No, this is for someone.
Okay. So let's go, I'll stop asking all the questions, Elaine.
So I mean, I only have a background in investor-owned utility world and working with the PUC, so, you know, caveat when I'm gonna say to that. But thinking like integrating gas and electric, well, what do we mean by integrate? And there's a need here to be pretty specific and give PUC authority. And, you know, something that works for gas utilities and electric utilities, like how are they coming to the table? What is our agreed upon sort of path here? I like timely in here and orderly, but to what? And so that of course is the crux, right? And then how does that get defined? And I mean, the PUC is not gonna have authority at this point to, you know, to make any sort of decisions. They're independent businesses. I guess the other point I would raise is from a customer perspective too. So, you know, our Energy Trust view, it's, you know, we're working with all sorts of, you know, residential, yes, but also industrial, commercial, and how are these customers finding a way to get to decarbonization? And so we're running into challenges like that all the time. You know, how do we help them with the tools we have? We're very limited. So a way to open that up by having this bigger conversation around where are we going, who can do what, who has authority to make what decisions, and how do the businesses, you know, I don't know, are sustained through that or are work through that.
Jessica, what's up, Jennifer? Are you representing Jennifer?
This is Jennifer Hillhart has a question to ask her. Her hands raised.
Yep, Jennifer.
Thank you very much. I'll just say at CUB, we actually think integrating gas and electric system planning is a good idea. And so we're definitely open to that. And I think there are a lot of resources already available that talk about, you know, decarbonization and the viability of low carbon fuels. The PUC has looked at this a lot, the cost effectiveness related to it. So I want to encourage us to, you know, really dig into existing resources before jumping into other studies, because I worry that would kick the can down the road, or additional studies rather. We do want a timely manner. My other comment is I do think we need to center environmental justice communities in all of our strategies here. These communities have been historically discriminated by energy making decisions, particularly targeted by pollutive industries, and don't have a seat at the table. So we need to make sure that these folks don't continue to be discriminated against and are meaningfully considered in our strategies.
Jennifer, what does that look like? So is that when utilities are kind of meeting with each other, that EJ populations are there? Like what's the action?
Well, I think all of us who are there and have historically been there need to remember the historical impacts on EJ communities. So I think it's on us who have been making the decisions, continue to make decisions, to remember to center these communities in our conversations. Like inviting EJ representatives to the table is absolutely necessary, and we should do that. But the resources that these marginalized communities have aren't as great as those of us who work in these spaces every day.
That's fair. Thank you. I'm gonna say, let's keep moving, and then if there's things that are coming up for folks, because we do want to move through a lot, just jot down your notes and we'll hopefully have a little bit of space at the end to just say anything that you wanted to add. So let's keep
Okay,
moving.
thanks. So we're gonna go deeper into a very closely related topic. This slide represents the range of what we heard in buildings, and particularly looking at this intersection of the current role of the different technologies that we have for heating buildings and hot water, particularly focused on gas and electricity. So when we talk about building electrification, if we look at our modeling, it really points to the need to electrify a lot of those end uses. And we've heard, but that's not going to happen overnight. And we continue to rely on gas as an essential service to keep people warm, keep their water warm. And so there's a question about kind of what the pathway is to the future. And this is one of the areas that's ambiguous. And we heard these stickies kind of represent things that we heard. These aren't our words. These are words from the working groups. And there's this range, everything from far right, no policy action is needed, to far left, ban natural gas, space, and water heating equipment. We've heard we've heard everything in between as well. And so this is a space that I'm just gonna own. It's an uncomfortable space, but I think we need to talk about it. And so if we go to the next slide, I'm going to put up a couple of policy actions. I don't want the focus to be on the specific policy actions as much as on what's behind them. So we can talk a little bit more, like unpack this a little bit more. So, but I will start with the policy actions. And these are both policy actions that are somewhere in between those two parts of the line. So the first one here is modify the Oregon Residential Specialty Code to require increased envelope efficiency measures. So stuff like insulation, windows, that kind of thing. If electric resistance or natural gas is used for primary space heating systems. So this is new builds, and it's kind of recognizing that if we do the most energy efficient thing, which tends to be efficient electric heat pumps in a new building, you can match a certain level of envelope efficiency. If you opt for something that's less efficient and more carbon intensive, then you got to really thermos up that house, really work on the insulation. And the second is to eliminate incentives for natural gas, space, and water heating equipment that's used as a primary heating source. So again, we want to recognize that secondary value of kind of hybrid systems and not take away that resilience element, but also be conscious of the role of incentives to advance us towards our goals, and really think about whether we need to shift in how we think about those incentives to advance our goals. And then, what I really want to focus on, because these are kind of two examples and I put them out there because they're concrete. But I want to focus the discussion, happy to hear comments on those particular recommendations or policy action ideas. But I want to get at what we're trying to get at with them to facilitate a discussion, because I could imagine just people liking or not liking the way it's framed for different reasons. So first, today households in Oregon rely on electricity, natural gas, propane, and other fuels for heating. That's where we are. Energy efficiency and adoption of efficient electric heat pumps are essential strategies to reduce the carbon footprint of homes in line with state policies, but current policies do not set clear direction to guide investment in buildings. Some households may prefer to continue to heat with other technologies, and that leads to lower efficiency and makes emissions reductions more challenging, maybe more expensive to achieve. And so we're trying to strike a balance here between kind of customer preference, existing technologies, and how we navigate that landscape. Expected outcomes include setting a clear direction towards decarbonizing buildings, providing kind of different ways to get there, shifting homes to the most efficient technologies over time, and leaving space for a diversity of technologies and fuels for backup systems. And then risks are, we've done this energy wallet analysis, and for some homes, this is not the least cost way to go, at least not today. there are near-term reliability concerns on electricity systems. Are we getting at those the way that this is framed, or do we need to think about, like, how do we think about that? And we're reducing a key source of revenues for natural gas companies. And that's just the elephant in the room. I'm just gonna say it because it's there and it's a risk, and we hear about it, we know about it. And our current policies are structured to drive us in this direction of decarbonizing. And the question is, how do we navigate the building space? So
what are people responding to?
well, so if we
Sorry.
go back to the original questions, it's, you know, particularly when we think about the kind of the challenges that we see, are we, sorry, I'm trying to click on the slide. How do we maximize benefits and mitigate risks of, and how do we, I mean, going back to the request that we set more specific direction, we can also talk about that direction.
But not necessarily so these are concepts? like,
These are
okay.
concepts that we put out that came out of discussions, and we're trying to kind of strike a balance that falls between the extremes that we heard. The bookends, I should say, that we heard. But we're not saying that this is right. I think what we're saying is, how do we navigate this, and how do we overcome these challenges? How do we structure a path that maximizes benefits, mitigates risks?
Okay, so let's go Aaron, Mary, and then Juan and Jennifer. Look like there was some comments in the chat. So Aaron,
Is there a reason that we're not bringing a carbon focused frame to this?
It is implicit but not explicit. So that's one thing that we can talk about.
yeah, what would
Yeah.
the carbon frame look like?
I mean, our goal here, right, at the highest level
Yeah.
is reduce the carbon emissions associated with keeping buildings comfortable for human beings to be inside of them. We're starting to get the specific underlying pieces that we think are gonna go into that. But we at no point say like, our goal is to reduce carbon from buildings, and we are gonna be focused on that and prioritizing the measures that best achieve that. And if that's building envelope, if that's fuel switching, if that's whatever, like, let's go ahead and do those. But the metric that we are trying to hit, the metric we're trying to move is carbon emissions. Because I think that gives us, again, it is a little bit more goal oriented, that gives us flexibility to think about what technologies are coming, how do they fit, where do they go, how do they align, how are costs changing over time. So if there's a reason that we're not, because it's too complicated, or we can't do the math, or no one wants to think about carbon intensities anymore, you know, those are all helpful context, but it seems that it's missing from the sort of how do we orient the state against this problem.
Yeah, thanks.
Mary?
And Aaron very articulately said, a thing that I also wanted to point out, you know, is the goal carbon emission reduction or promotion of specific technologies, right? Because I think those are two very different things, and there is alignment. You know, I think building efficiency maximization and electrification are not the same thing. And especially thinking across the different uses of energy in our state, and the different uses of energy in buildings in our state, and the energy resources available to specific communities. So I think tying to any one end use or any one technology is, I think, short-sighted if we're thinking about a long-term and durable goal. Obviously, name the bias. I work at the utility that distributes natural gas at the moment. And therefore we would like to think that we have a future in the energy system. And so we see some opportunities there. I would challenge us to really have that conversation. If carbon emission reduction is the goal, which I believe it is, can we please say that explicitly and identify, you know, how that looks across the diversity of communities and uses of energy?
So just to reiterate, you all, it sounds like you're both trying to talk about kind of the goal of kind of reducing carbon within kind of buildings, energy efficiency versus this kind of promotion of specific technologies in order to
Yes.
get there.
Yes.
Okay. I think there was a bunch of chat stuff, and Charity, you have a hand. So I saw Juan, I saw Jennifer, I saw Charity, I saw Andrea. Help me figure out the order of what happened.
I'm gonna flag Juan first. He asked a question in the chat where he said, do we know what the current cost of replacement to new efficient technology is? And I just added to the chat a reminder that when we looked at the energy wallet, very broad, but we did find that in some cases, particularly when you're replacing less efficient electric heating to much more efficient electric heat pumps, the cost, you do get cost savings, from the energy for those consumers. But this does not apply broadly across all types of heating or consumers. And so Juan had a follow-up to that, which is good point. What is our measure of success? And I'm actually not totally sure that that was relevant to what I said or not. So Juan, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
No, the measure of success remark that was in regards to what are we measuring? Carbon reduction. Is our goals to make people comfortable in buildings, or is carbon our carbon footprint? So that was my comment. But going back to the cost of replacement of new more efficient technology, I think it goes back to what was mentioned earlier in the meeting, right? For a small business to have solar panels, the investment is 700,000, right? You're looking for homes to replace current forms of heating in our homes. What will be the cost to replace it to something more energy efficient? And the reason I asked that question is for benchmark, right? If we know that today, as of today, in order to replace a heating pump for something more efficient, and it's going to be $10,000, at least we know where we're starting, right? Because economies of scale, if we're able to figure out a way to have more demand and more efficient technologies at scale, that cost should come down. But at least we need to know what is today with current technology and current restraints, what is the cost to somebody to just replace their current heat pump with the current technology that's available, just to have a point of reference. Because when we equate that to future savings, we had to be mindful that no, the only people they're gonna be thinking that is gonna have that forward thinking and savings is people that have the money right now, right? It's people that are able to afford the heat pump and say, okay, yeah, I'm gonna save $10,000 in 10 years, and we're forgetting the low income folks or people that don't have the ability to do that long term thinking. That was my thought.
Thank you, Juan. So I think it's Jennifer and Charity and Andrea, maybe?
Charity, I think, is first.
Charity?
And I can reflect Jennifer's comment to everybody.
Okay, so let's go Charity, then we'll reflect Jennifer's comment, and Andrea, then Elaine, then Brandon. Okay, Charity?
So I have a couple of comments. I'm in the buildings working group, so this is not the first time I'm seeing this, and I was part of that process. I said there the other day, and I'll say again, this is frustrating for me that there isn't something explicitly about allowing incentives for people who are going from gas to electric. That is a barrier that if you look in the slide previously, many people listed as a barrier, and it's not here at all for one of the kind of solutions for that barrier. And I just want to point out, this group, and we talk about EJ communities, and we talk about the importance of that. I am representing an organization that is an EJ org, right? We do work in low-income households. We are, that is who we are and why I'm here. And I feel like sometimes there's a lot of talk, but I still don't feel like I'm seeing the real actions. And when we're saying to you, this is one of the biggest barriers that we have for the electrification work we're doing, and it doesn't get representative here, it feels very frustrating, right? So if we're going to take that seriously, then I feel like groups that are doing the work, that are environmental justice groups, like, where is that being reflected? We go into homes every day, right? We have done 100 households now with deep energy retrofits in the last 2 years. We speak to clients in community listening sessions. Like, we are really rooted in what people want, what they fear, what they aspire to. And so I just feel like some of this work right now isn't really pushing far enough or hard enough. And I worry that sometimes we're getting stuck in what risks might be. And that's leading to some potential solutions without thinking broader about what those solutions could be. For example, risk about some households might have increased monthly costs. That is a concern, and there are many ways to address that. You can address that through, the low income bill discount programs that we have all worked tirelessly to set up. There are ways that we can address those things that aren't about just thinking about the technology going in or fears of those technologies. We have really strong carbon reduction goals in this state, and we really need to be pushing for those. And I just fear that some of this work is starting to be too compromising and not looking at like the science and rooted in the need of what the carbon reduction goals are that are clear for the state already in policy. So sorry, like there was just a couple of points there that I feel like I'm intertwining, but like, again, there's nothing here about the customers that we work with that want to go from a gas system to an electric. And we find other sources of funding because we have to, but we have state incentive systems that don't allow for that. And I'm very disappointed that that's not here.
Thank you, Charity. And I guess Edith and team, you talk about like, where does that level of detail? So there's kind of policy actions, like hearing folks talk about a policy action around reducing carbon, maybe, or decarbonization for buildings. And then there's like the strategies under, or the tactics, I don't know what the right word is. Can you talk about like, because I think you're making a good point, Charity. It's like not just naming kind of what are we trying to achieve under building efficiency and electrification, but where do you get to that level of detail that gets to the kind of tactical aspects?
I think it is here, and we've only put up 2 here for discussion. I think, Charity, the comments that you're giving, the types of that level of specificity is really helpful to us so that we can start to, we haven't finished framing up these recommendations, right? So hearing really specific ideas and things that would be helpful really helps us at this stage to add. We'll have several policy actions. These aren't the only ones. And then, it also affects kind of how this thinking and getting into the specifics, I think also helps us get at the more general level and test whether it is specific enough. We don't have carbon reductions explicitly in the high level policy actions for buildings. Maybe it needs to be more explicit. We have policies that are kind of driving us in that direction, but maybe we need to do more explicit there. So I think we're hitting it at multiple levels in this discussion.
So I think we got a queue, and then I'm gonna have to stop it at this queue so we can move to the next. I think we have Jennifer, Andrea, Elaine, Brandon, Zach. No,
Andrea.
No, Andrea. Okay. Jennifer?
I just was going to raise the point that I also think we need to look at affordability, and I was trying to put some of those points in the chat. And I don't think it's carbon reduction at all costs. I mean, we are seeing that in the legislature now with all these rate bills, trying to cap rates and so forth, that it cannot be carbon reduction at all costs. And, the low income discount programs can only get you so far. I mean, those costs for those programs get shifted to other ratepayers. So that's not like a solution that is a silver bullet. So I guess I would say we need to go back to the modeling. What does the modeling tell us about costs in the wallet, the energy wallet, and so forth? And I would hope that those would kind of drive the sideboards that someone was asking about in the chat. What are the sideboards on costs? And we can't just make policy recommendations in a vacuum without looking at the cost implications. I mean, the legislature is, like I said, debating that right now, and I don't think that's going to fly.
And Jennifer, is there a way to mitigate what you're describing, or a solution? I mean, maybe it's the legislature needs to invest more dollars to kind of backfill those low-income programs, so it's not distributed to other ratepayers, if I hear you saying, or it's not just borne on utilities, but is there a,
Well, I guess it's not like that we don't do these things, because we all support the transition. It's just the pace, I guess, is what I would say. And what makes sense when we can't have it all at once. We got to do a stepwise process. So I guess I'm not questioning, that there are tools out there. It's just at what pace.
Yeah, that's fair. Thank you. Elaine?
Yeah, I guess another support for decarbonization angle, that would promote a lot of tools there, would help customers be able to do their own integrated fuel planning, like give more flexibility there. I guess to the prescription of actions like eliminating incentives, I get the intent behind that. I think a challenging part to that is even like moderate income. Any of us maybe not at the table who are not immersed in energy. When your water heater goes out, you might just replace it with exactly what you had before. And that's an ongoing challenge of just awareness. And so I think we can hit a lot of this, and I'm not speaking to specific communities, low income barriers and all that, but there's a whole swath of Oregonians who don't really understand what we understand at this table about equipment options and who to go to for what. So it's just an underlying thing that we're trying to everyday battle. And so it's more of just the don't let go of that, and don't lose sight of that and all the negative don't do this, but more of like, where are we going? Why does the state want to do this? Why is it good to invest in electrification? Why, all of that, I think, promote more of that.
That's great. Thank you, Elaine. Brandon, then Zach, and then I'm gonna move us on to the next.
Yeah, I'll try to be as concise as possible here, and I'm just trying to articulate my thoughts, but I'm thinking about this through the lens of loss of load probability, resource adequacy, most importantly, and I think that natural gas is a really important complementary system to meeting load, especially in the Northwest. And this comes in the context of the most recent PNUC forecast that indicates, 30% load projection increase over the course of the next 10 years. It's accounting for data centers. That's not even necessarily accounting for building electrification. So I think that that's really a valuable approach to consider when we're considering resource adequacy, reliability, resiliency, and environmental justice and stewardship. So just wanted to make that note.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna bring up something that feels like missing from this, and maybe also not just for this particular conversation, but generally overarching for the policy actions, is the temporal aspect of the policy actions. Like, are these recommendations saying tomorrow those should be, the incentives should be eliminated? Is it by 2030? And I guess that kind of lifts up a comment that Jennifer mentioned about the pace, and I think that is an important conversation. And that also gets at, like, okay, if we don't do something by 2030, what is the risks of not acting by then? And I think the modeling can help us understand that. And there are assumptions built into the modeling to help see when action would need to be taken by. And if you go down one path, you maybe close off a different path. So I think that kind of temporal analysis being brought to this particular action, and also the other actions, can maybe help sort through some of these challenges. And I guess the other piece I just want to say is that there was a lot of talk about carbon emissions, really important in this particular discussion. And also this particular place provides a ton of co-benefits. And so not wanting to lose sight of that in the recommendations that are put forward.
Thanks.
Good. So I know timely and orderly came up. I guess for Odo, do you all, even if it's not in the strategy itself, getting to by this date, is that something you kind of put on the table, is like the thinking around kind of each of these kind of policies, so folks are actually reacting to, is that timely, is that orderly, is it realistic?
We are thinking about how to how to incorporate that temporal aspect. Because Zach, as you said, we have the modeling. The modeling does not take into account all the changes that have happened since January, right? So there's also like, there are near term, like very real challenges across the board. And then there are like our goals, which are long term, and there is a need to, I think that there is a need to define near-term policy actions. That's the goal here, is for these to be near term. And I think to make things clear, we need to signal kind of what that's leading to. And we haven't really gotten into it here. We're still thinking through it ourselves. But I think that comments that speaking to it are helpful for us to think about, I mean, just thinking about the comment on the pressure on electricity systems today. One way of thinking about it when I look at our energy wallet analysis is there's a lot of homes with electric resistance heating. And if you switch to a heat pump, the newer heat pumps actually help reduce peak loads, even in colder climates. And much of Oregon is not colder climate. And so, is there an opportunity in the near term to kind of focus on the areas that help relieve where the greatest pressure is in the near term, but then we need a longer term vision. And so figuring out and policy tends to be it's hard to define policies that are that specific, right? And so how do we nestle these ideas and nest them and present them in a way that's useful, I think is really important.
Yeah, it seems like there's a kind of an appetite for that some level of conversation around the kind of temporal thinking. Because I think that's underlying a lot of people's comments. Okay, so let's move to the next section. And again, we'll hopefully create a little bit of time. Nope. Yep, there we go.
Okay, there we go. All right, the next, these are all super easy, right? Okay, next big topic. This is something that we hear about a lot. If we look at the Northwest Power Conservation Council's forecast through 2029 for data centers, it could be up to a gigawatt of data centers coming online, mostly in the eastern part of the state. We don't know if those loads will show up, or where they'll show up, but we have identified in our analysis that we anticipate significant load growth and need to be ready for it in terms of our system itself and ability to supply those loads. But our remit here is to also look at emissions. And so we see, a lot of the utility service territories where these data centers are planning to site have traditionally been served through Bonneville Clean Hydropower, but where there isn't more to service these data centers, right? And BPA's new large load policy also kind of prevents that. So these data centers and other large loads need to go elsewhere to get their power, and it's not guaranteed that power is going to be clean. Particularly, if you go to buy market purchases, you end up with unspecified power, and that raises our state's emission profile. And so we have been thinking about how we can address this. There's a concern over a jump in our overall emissions profile. The expected load growth also contributes to a regional concern about resource adequacy. So that's there too. But we're also aware of the economic opportunities. So we're trying to think through all of these different pieces. The action that we have up here is, again, also just to put on the table to iterate around the challenges, barriers. So maybe there are other ways to go about this, but what we're putting up here is what we shared with our working group, which is extend HB 2021 clean energy requirements to new large loads. What we're trying to accomplish with this idea is to mitigate the risk of those rising emissions and provide a clear regulatory signal that's consistent with Oregon's economy-wide decarbonization goals, and support the additional development of specified renewable and non-emitting resources. There are risks here too. Will putting in place emissions goals actually drive new large loads to site elsewhere? Are there cost considerations here that we need to keep in mind? Also, there's potential just additional complexity and administrative burdens for utilities serving each new large load. Often these large loads come to smaller service territories. adding this emissions element also kind of complicates things in that territory. So putting all of that out on the table for discussion.
So maybe I'll confession first, electrolytic hydrogen is produced from electricity. And so we hope to be a new large load that would fit here. We appreciate data centers going first and figuring out what's not working so that we can start fixing it before the hydrogen industry really starts hitting at scale. But we see projects in California and Texas that are hundreds of megawatts of electrolytic capacity. Many of them are looking at bringing their own renewables because they can't get the interconnection that they need. And so I think, there's been a ton of work done on things like the 45V tax credit to think about how hydrogen has climate integrity as we bring new resources on board. But at the end of the day, it's about having clean electricity and having access to clean electricity. I expect that any of the tech companies would tell you, if you can get me affordable renewable power, I will buy it. Right? And so the challenge is less about are large loads compliant and more, do large loads have access to clean electricity? And what does that look like and how do we enable that?
Thanks.
And if they don't?
Well, then either you don't get hydrogen, right at the end of the day, it's like you either don't get those resources developed or you get your power from whatever sources you can get your power from. And I think I would just add for hydrogen specifically, I think there's a lot of folks who are looking at this as a tool to achieve climate goals, and we can't be that tool unless we get that clean electricity. So.
Yeah.
Joshua has a question.
Joshua. Let's try it. So you got the phone?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm on the phone. So yeah, a few points on this. Piggybacking off of what Aaron said, I think, we absolutely have to look at this through a transmission lens. That is one of the biggest constraints to serving these growing loads, particularly data centers with clean energy. And to the extent that this is, a policy action that's coming out of the clean generation and transmission policy, I really would strongly recommend that, we include that transmission lens, and whatever policy action can be incorporated into this to expand, improve, and modernize transmission. I think that's important. The second thing is I would recommend also that we not limit this to non-HB 2021 service territories. I think you're right that, there is a kind of regulatory gap for the COUs, but there is also a lot of difficulty in serving data centers with any energy, much less clean energy, for the IOUs as well. And so we shouldn't take for granted that just because they're covered by HB 2021 that there is a certain that there's a bright line sort of glide path towards that. So I think we need to take a critical eye to that as well. And then my third point would be just on the risks portion here, the lost economic opportunities part, just to be mindful that many, if not all of the states where there's large data center markets are also thinking critically about this. And so I don't think it's a good outcome to have a race to the bottom. And I also don't think that that's realistic. I think that that probably, again, most of the states where data centers are located are going to have, you're going to see kind of tightening up of policies to make sure that that they're able to serve those loads with clean energy in the long term.
Thanks, Joshua. Is that a new card?
Yeah, can I have one more? Joshua, everything you said is great, so thank you. Just emphasis on the transmission issue and Edith, to the discussion we'd had earlier about like, what are we doing in the next 3 years? We're in a, very specific administration and federal context. I think really thinking about what BPA is gonna be able to do in this period and what they're not going to be able to do. And what that means about where transmission development will need to come from.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, let's keep, let's not.
I just wanted to lift up the piece of this that is about like who's paying for the cost of serving these new large loads, and it brings out the umbrella on environmental justice and equity that is overarching all these strategies. And so in talking about applying these requirements, there's also a question of who is then paying for that. And there's discussions right now in the legislature about that. And so that maybe will be taken care of, but just want to flag that as an important component of this particular conversation.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. Yeah, I just, I can't help but like kind of think about, you know, these data centers primarily coming in, and they've just changed the whole landscape that we're working with. You know, before them, it was like, yes, we can get to this clean energy, we can get to our goal, there's all these things we can put together, and then now they're just throwing it all off. And it seems like, and I don't have all the background to know how you do this, but it seems like they should be addressed separately. I know Washington's doing a task force to try to think about separate ways to do it. I just think, you know, it needs to be kind of circled and pulled aside, and what can we do to help these guys, but, you know, not bring down the consumers, not, you know, fill our lands with transmission just for data centers. You know, if that's the choice, then make them provide their own energy source on site. You know, just ideas like that it really just needs to be thought of separately.
Yeah, thank you. Aaron?
Oh, really quick thing, load flexibility, thinking about thinking about solutions, if we can think about how these assets can.
Thank you for being, all right, let's go to the next one.
All right, we're gonna talk about transmission now. Gosh, we heard you.
Segue, yes.
I kind of want to do this slide a little bit differently, and I want to jump to something to see if it helps the discussion. So at the top, you can see the recommendation we presented to the working group about a new state entity. But I want to focus on, like, I think we all agree that we need to get transmission built. And where the disagreement has come is in how we go about it and what's actually needed. And I know, you know, the bill didn't pass for a transmission authority. It's really difficult to get over the line. And so I want to ask the question, I'm just going to start the conversation, then you can all disagree with me. But is the state bonding authority the thing that we need? Do we need like some money on the table to help just make a financial commitment and get others to come together to make the financial commitment to build the transmission? Or is it something else? But I'm going to frame up the question that way because I don't want us to argue over the language up here. I want us to get at the heart of like, what do we need to get transmission built? Because it's absolutely clear that that is a huge barrier and it's hard. And there are regional initiatives working on this. I know utilities are working really hard to get transmission built, and it is hard. So like, what's the secret sauce that we can put in the energy strategy? Is it having, yeah, and what's the state's role? Like, what can the state do? That's how I tee it up.
Are there any barriers that get to, I can't read it.
Yeah, I mean, so here we have like insufficient capacity to meet forecasted demand and clean electricity goals. You know, their transmission constraints are a significant barrier to accessing electricity that we need. Developing transmission is expensive, and the development process takes many years. We don't have in here, you know, there are obviously many other issues that we've heard about in the working groups. There's, you know, siting and permitting and local resistance. I mean, Portland is having trouble building transmission through Forest Park, right? So there are just, this is hard. This is a tough nut to crack. And our question is like, help us crack this nut. Like, and we won't be able to do everything with the energy strategy, but like, where can the state push, like, what's the button that we should be?
Yeah, and this is a wonderful moment of like, I don't know that we need to hear from folks of all the ways that, all the things that are getting in the way of transmission. I mean, I'm just gonna look and maybe validate that. There's a lot of reasons that folks can come up to. So this is that kind of solution oriented. So you put one thing around kind of utilizing state's bonding authority. maybe that's a starting point.
Mhm.
Jessica, you have a,
Ivy has her hand up.
yes, Ivy.
Okay, so I think it's often a lot of times misunderstood. I think that when people think about building transmission, a lot of resistance are coming into that because they're thinking we're just plotting a whole bunch of them just for data centers. That's not correct. If anything in the language to kind of really help understand, it's upgrading. You're utilizing the existing transmission lines that you have those structures to upgrade it to a different design and maintain them so that way they can take up more loads of energy consumption. And that could be for solar panels that you're talking about, for electric vehicles. So it has that capacity. The problem is that the current aging infrastructure that you have right now, those towers that you have currently, a lot of them were built in the 70s. They are meeting that load, or if not at capacity already. What you need to have is to have that upgraded. That doesn't mean you're having to build 100 more transmission lines. Ideally, that would be great though, but I know that with permitting and planning and the approvals takes a lot of time with that. And another thing to consider is that Bonneville Power Administration is not getting the funding from Oregon. They're getting their funding from Department of Energy to get a lot of these projects going for all of Northwest.
So Ivy, in your perfect world, how would you get to the result of upgrading?
It's just designing. I mean, all it is for Bonneville Power, a lot of it is owned by BPA. And I really wish that we had someone from BPA represented to be here to talk more about it, because I'm not an expert on this area, on the designing and as a structural engineer on this part. But I think that to kind of get over it, it's just to understand that the funding or working with Bonneville Power Administration is critical to meeting zero carbon emission by 2050. And that by having transmission lines be upgraded through a newly designed to increase capacity for data usage for the future or for renewable energy will be vital. So that way the communities in both rural and the metro areas have affordable costs.
So I appreciate you naming, like, there's the kind of footprint aspect. You're saying there's existing that we need to upgrade. I guess BPA is not at the table. I don't know if anybody wants to channel BPA. So it's either the feds giving them a bunch of money to upgrade.
We asked them to come.
What's the I guess, like, I'm trying to think, like, how do we get there? If BPA owns a bunch of them, I was just listening to this on OPP talking about how BPA's built like 1 mile in the last, God knows how many years, right? So we know that that's like, what's the state's role and solution to trying to contribute to the upgrade and load capacity that's necessary for those comments? So I got Jessica, do you want to bring in somebody?
Diane has her hand raised, and,
Okay.
and Ivy, unless your hand's new, can you put it down just so I don't get confused, because I'm easily confused by hands. Thanks.
Okay, so let's go Diane, Aaron, Mary, Shannon.
Great, thank you. And Ivy, thank you for bringing up the fact that a lot of the capacity that we could gain in the transmission system can be from upgrading existing lines, which does alleviate some of the siting concerns, but also plus one to Jennifer's comment that even we're seeing difficulties even with upgrading existing. So I don't know what the secret sauce is there other than the streamlining, and there were some discussions this session that are still that were happening around potential solutions there. But the bigger picture question of, is it the bonding that we need? Is it the paying? Is it the permitting? Is it the planning? The 3 Ps? I think it's all of the above. What if I were to kind of throw out my transmission dream right now, based on what we're seeing with the bottlenecks in both the interconnection and the transmission queues, is there a way that we can bolster BPA's analysis and transmission design teams in a way that coordinates with the IOUs and kind of brings the systems together? And I probably would have said that even before current situation, but I think the current situation has really put shine a spotlight on the difficulties that BPA is facing and not having enough manpower to do all of the studies and analysis. So I think having something on the that the state could do, either as a platform or I don't know, something that can coordinate with BPA transmission planners, IOU planners, leveraging that talent because it is a limited supply right now. Everyone's struggling with that workforce to help free up some of those solutions. And I'll just flag that BPA is doing their own transmission service request reform right now because they are also trying to grapple with how do we get through these planning bottlenecks. So I agree, absolutely permitting siting, big issue, but we're also seeing really big barriers with the bottlenecks in the planning piece as well in the analysis.
So let's go, Aaron, Mary, Shannon.
First, just general thumbs up. Thank you for putting this on the list. We need it. I think also acknowledging that this is one of the thorny questions and there is a limit to how much we're gonna get solved in these 3 years, let's call them. So if there's specific pieces, grid enhancing technologies, flexible load, increased reliance on DERs, you pick your solution set that helps to keep our transmission system more usable, helps to free up access and capacity. Those are no regrets things that we need to start immediately. We also need to start laying the foundation for the fact that our electric system is supposed to be doubling in the windows that we're looking at. And that is, we do not have systems in place right now to address a change of that magnitude and scale. And so if this is the forum that folks want for that, great, but starting to separate out the near terms versus the big thornies.
Mary?
Just two quick notes. It's just as an energy enthusiast, clearly, as you all know where I work, we don't build electric transmission. But there's a need to reckon with trade-offs. We have a lot of policies and priorities in our state that need more transmission. But I would say that is not common knowledge across the populace. And so this is an energy literacy gap that we can't meet our climate goals until we address that, which is hard and ambiguous and nebulous, but I feel like it's worth mentioning. But then also a possible recommendation, as we're creating policy recommendations through this process, any policy that's going to result in, which is most, if not all of them, a need for increased load in transmission should mention that. We can't just make policies and keep on running up against, I think, this transmission need. And that's hard. And writing legislative language is a dance. But I just think that we have to reckon with the fact that almost every single thing we do for the future of our state to achieve the goals is gonna require this, so we should name it.
So Shannon and Jennifer?
I like what Diane was saying about the collaboration and complementing the planning that is already going on, but bringing everything together. And I realize that there's West Tech and there are these attempts to get better coordination. But also thinking about the transparency and the flexibility of the system. Grid enhancing technologies have been brought up, virtual power plants, what are these DERs? And then also, what about additional flexibility? And I know that there are a lot of people looking at that, the implications of firm versus not firm transition. When can we use it? When is it unacceptable? Do we have to look in the rearview mirror and be bound by those contractual obligations that might be outdated? Recognizing that transmission is a sticky wicket in terms of the siloing that's required from a federal standpoint between generation planning and transmission planning, but maybe we should be, as a state, advocating for breaking down that silo. So in terms of transparency, who has what transmission rights? Where are those hotspots? Just level the playing field and bring more minds to the solution set. Because I think that, to get to Ivy's point, that will help with the siting and permitting if we all understand, we took a holistic look at this and it's not based on the self-interest of who was doing the looking or the planning. That's a great role for the state to play.
Thanks, Shannon. Jennifer?
I was just gonna, to the question of whether the bonding authority was needed, I haven't heard that, in any of the debates, that I don't think a showing has been made for that. And I don't see why the state really has a role. I mean, I think this is more of a regional issue, a utility issue. a developer issue, BPA issue. I just don't think the state has expertise to be running a transmission authority. The way the bills were set up in the legislature, it really was a narrow swath of participants, and the utilities were excluded from that. So, I mean, that makes zero sense. So, I mean, I think the details really do matter on this, and I just don't think a case has been made that this is the right solution, that is the state transmission authority is the best means to advance Oregon's energy policy objectives. I just don't think that case has been made. I believe that there are issues around transmission, but I'm not sure that this is the solution.
Jennifer, so, what's this card? Comment? Yeah.
Well, I was actually gonna try and expand the conversation a little bit, if I may, which is to start to get into what folks who might have some expertise in the land use area, and Mary Kyle, if you have some thoughts on sort of what you see as the barriers around transmission planning from the land use perspective and what options there might be for policy to address them.
So land use solutions, and then, you know, Jennifer, I think you articulated, so if we could, if there's other strong thoughts around the bonding piece, but for our Tim and Mary Kyle, since you just got called out, any thoughts on solutions around the kind of land use components?
Well, Mary and I are often on opposite sides of some of these issues.
That's why it's so great you're around this table.
Yeah. Did you plant this, Ruchi? I mean, it is extremely complex, and it's really easy just to sort of cast opposition as NIMBYs and obstructing stuff, because it is really much, much deeper and more complicated than that. But that said, it is extremely difficult to permit anything in the Northwest, particularly in the state of Oregon. It's just very hard. And we do have FSEC as a body that has a policy and legal directive to make, to make this happen. But something as complex as large scale utility scale transmission takes a very, very long time to permit, and it's very expensive, and it's very, very risky. I mean, I weathered through the PGE Cascade Crossing transmission line effort some years ago, and to have transmission lines over the Cascades to get to load in the Salem vicinity, and we just got overwhelmed by everything. I mean, not the least of which was Northern Spotted Owls, which is a real thing. I mean, it's not. I in no way want to be dismissive of the importance of resources and the compromise and how to kind of balance and deal with these resources. But I do think that if we're going to get there, compromises have to be made. Compromises in natural resource, the existence of natural resources along the transmission line routes. I mean, and I think that the state, frankly, I think the state law probably needs to be more clear in setting forth those compromises so that we can actually succeed in these endeavors. And we can have a debate about what that means, and we can talk about what the rights are for people who have a personal stake, who have homes nearby, who natural resources surrounding these locations. But without some very substantial compromise, it's going to be very, very difficult to do this. Mary Kyle, you're
it's like Crossfire or whatever.
I feel like I should duck. I'm not even sure we were involved in that one. I remember having early discussions, not with you, but with the going across Cascades. I think the transmission line issue is actually, I think it processes different types of ownerships of land. I think that's one of the complications, right? It's not just land that would be impacted by Oregon's land use planning process, it's land that's state-owned land, et cetera. So I think that's one issue, and actually having that slide or an earlier one, establishing to do statewide transmission planning, so it's not just one-offs of one utility wants to do transmission or line or another, but to have that statewide program so that landowners or people who live near there or people who are advocates for environmental issues, whatever, can see how does this all have to play out on the bigger picture, right? And not just would feel like they're coming at it. So I think if there's the planning across all land ownerships and it was comprehensive and the public was engaged in that, that would make it easier to then execute individual lines. That seems to be a little bit.
Well, and I was just gonna add, Diane Brandt's on here, and now I'm talking to Diane. And Diane's deep into this with Renewables Northwest, and she's been very involved in some of these resource planning conversations. So Diane, I hope, maybe you can pile on a little bit here.
Right, well, but I mean, we're trying to do this on the generation side with rulemaking of like comprehensive, where are the low conflict areas, right? It's the planning board upfront comprehensively that can reduce conflicts or mitigate them as it's then executed, and that seems to be the part.
And is that led by the state? Is that what I'm hearing? Like, I mean, you talked about the state kind of programmatically.
Federal line, too, like the line where I described. I mean, there's gotta be a way to coordinate that, right?
That's all right.
Yeah, so it might be led by the state. I think it is, I mean, I'm not just, well.
Yeah, so let's go to Diane and then we'll. Oh, Joshua had his hand. Well, Diane, you got called out, so I'm gonna pull you in and then we'll go to Joshua and then move on.
And I told him we had.
I'm happy to let Joshua go because I was trying to think exactly what I could add to the conversation around on the land use side as well. So I don't know, Tim, if you had a specific thought on where you wanted me to jump in, I'm happy to. Just percolating.
Yeah, I mean, not specifically, Diane, if you had something to, just from an RNW perspective and trying to start to grapple with and build coalitions around some of these conversations. I know you guys are busy, we're busy, I'm a member of RNW, so I'll take some ownership here as well, but.
No, I think generally I'll just say that absolutely we're trying to figure out how to navigate and have for a while the land use system, and we had lots of conversations with Mary Kyle and others. We were a part of the siting table a couple of years ago that started the solar siting rack, which it was trying to find some of those least conflict areas and to mitigate some of the tensions going on. And it's hard. It's really hard, especially because we already alluded to the real mix in Oregon of land ownership between private and federal, a lot of it being federal. How do you coordinate with all of those? It leads to really long permitting processes, but that also means it puts a lot of pressure on the private land, which in Oregon, if any of you have read the OPB articles, a lot of times the default classification of land is EFU, exclusive farmland use. So I think it gets to the heart of what has already been mentioned a few times here, is teasing out the trade-offs and how do we address those in the policy recommendations, in understanding that there is a lot of value to all the different land uses, but also we have to figure out a way to move forward that will probably mean having to find some compromise on the land use issues, especially, and how we're balancing that, which I'm not sure how you write a great policy proposal on that, and but that's why I'm hopeful for the conversation here that we can tease that out a little bit.
Well, we'll name that as a challenge for the Odo team to take this conversation and draft a policy proposal that then we can come back to. I mean, I think you're illuminating kind of the issues that need to be solved for, and trying to figure out how you write that in policy will be important. Joshua, and then we're gonna, I think, we have a couple more that we wanna maybe combine into one conversation. Joshua? I see your little phone up there on the screen, but we're not hearing you.
*6.
Joshua? Hello? Guys, I'm gonna chalk that to technical difficulty. *6 does look up.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Gotcha.
Okay. Sorry, I know we're running out of time this item, so I'll be brief. I just wanted to lift up, a few people have mentioned grid enhancing technologies. I want to make sure that we keep that in our sightline. We know that we need, all of the above transmission options. So, we need new lines, We need improvements on transmission lines. We need upgrades. Yes. One thing I'll just mention, kind of to make a finer point, is we often think of GETS and new lines sort of in silos. There's some interesting research that has found that particularly some of the software solutions like power controls, if implemented adequately, can actually obviate the need for like a redundant line. And so there is an intersection between GETS and kind of like firm infrastructure that I think would be a good thing for us to keep track of, and then kind of provide some of that for Odo stuff.
Thank you, Joshua. Okay, Edith.
Okay, I'm gonna bundle the next two together because we're limited on time, and I'm gonna give a preview of the last topic that we have for discussion, just so it's all on the table, because we will run out of time, but I just want you to know what was in our mind. So the next two relate to vehicle electrification. So, and I'm gonna bundle them together since they both relate to vehicles. And then the last thing that we wanted to talk about, I'm not sure whether we'll get to it, but I want at least to flag that we're really aware of this and thinking about it in case any of you want to share some thoughts kind of after the meeting, but quickly, because we need to kind of populate our thinking at this point. And that's kind of what the role of the energy strategy is in helping us address broader challenges. There are reductions in federal funding. There's uncertainty around supply chains, costs, tariffs are raising costs. So all of that is like a big issue that we're trying to address. And it actually also speaks to just the need for us. This is a long game, right? This is not a 4-year or 5-year game. This is like decades long. And how do we, it's a bit of a wake up call to be like, whoa, we as a state need to maybe build more resilience, I'll use that word, into how we pay for it, this energy transition, how we maintain kind of enough momentum for new technologies so that the costs do go down. So we get those benefits of scale, all that kind of stuff. So, is there a industrial strategy element here in terms of our competitive advantage and helping to shore up some of the gaps in supply chains? All of that, I think, is just stuff that we're thinking about. I just put like a really broad range of things on the table, but to the extent that there are specific ways that the energy strategy can look at what we have in place and improve on it, make it more resilient, build it up, I think that's something we're really interested in. And I'm going to go back to transportation, but I just wanted to lay out that piece of, we're looking at the near term, but we have a long game, and there is this, I'll just use wake up call again. It's like, whoa, we like what we're trying to accomplish as a state, and, as a region, we have some states that are aligned with us. It's really big stuff, and it's not stuff that Oregon alone can carry. And when the winds start blowing in different directions, it really affects us. So, talk amongst yourselves, kind of, coffee talk here, and age myself. Okay, if we go back, but y'all are laughing with me. Okay, so we have two kind of areas here that we wanted to flag for vehicle electrification, and the first is the need to fund medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification and kind of support the things that need to happen to accomplish this. And there's kind of 3 buckets that we talk about, and we're trying to be really judicious when we talk about funding something, because we know that money's tight. However, we know that fleet adoption of medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles requires overcoming an upfront cost barrier. We also know that we need charging and fueling infrastructure 2 to 3 years prior to adoption to gain consumer confidence. So we're not saying there's a chicken and egg. We're saying do that. We need some of that first. We need some of that infrastructure to build the confidence that medium heavy duty trucks are going to be able to charge up. And then there's also a distribution element here. So there are often customer side distribution system upgrades that are needed that also costs money. And so that's also something that kind of is envisioned here. Federal funding for these areas is kind of going away for a while. And so, so I just want to put this on the table as one of the issues that's really important to address, to overcome barriers to adoption of medium heavy duty zero emission vehicles. We have the Advanced Clean Trucks kind of goals, and they're really ambitious, but the market needs some support. And so, so that's where this gets at. And then I'm just going to skip to the next slide to talk about hosting capacity maps, which sounds really different, but it's related to that third point. Table. So, so again, we need that infrastructure ahead of time, but it's difficult to be able, there's not enough information out there to be able to tell like where to site the charging infrastructure. And the bigger the charging infrastructure, the more important that it is to find enough space on the grid. And so, this is just information transparency about the location, voltage of distribution circuits, feeders, lines, to understand where there's capacity to help site, to help kind of in the process of deciding where to site these things. Because you obviously want to site along a transportation corridor, but you also need that hosting capacity. And this is something that that California is doing and has kind of been doing for some time. And they started with something a little less complicated and added to it over time. And so I think it's really important. We think it's really important to have this conversation here too, and to consider the energy strategy as a place to flag this issue and to talk about whether there's a need for kind of more information around this. And I would just look to the electric utilities in the room to also, if you have views on this or ideas. I know that some of this is already happening, but there are differences in terms of what kind of data is available, the quality of that data, consistency across different utility service territories. And obviously, medium and heavy duty vehicles move around from one utility service territory to another. And so that's also, we have to think about that perspective. So I'm putting both of those topics on the table, and I know my colleague Jillian DeMedio is here too. So Jillian, if I mischaracterize anything, jump in and correct me. Otherwise, I just want to open it up for discussion.
Okay, so, and I recognize Rakesh is not here. So team, you might want to follow up specifically from the Daimler perspective. Aaron?
Continuing to give thumbs up on the concepts here, I think. I know this is a rough couple-year period in terms of funding, but these two things you flagged are like really complicated, meaty, technical things. And if honestly, we can get some of this figured out in the next 2 to 3 years, like that would be great progress for all of us. On the hosting capacity maps, I would say that the hosting capacity is like a first step, and then figuring out how we translate those into some kind of dollar value of, load management at the, lower voltage levels is a really important part of how California translated that grueling and slightly terrible process of going through their entire distribution system into something that actually encouraged projects and encouraged development. I'll also say in terms of long lead time, California is literally the only state in the nation right now that actually has a functional hydrogen fueling station program. It requires 3 agencies across California to even tell you the basics of what they're doing about fuel labeling and measurement and a whole bunch of other really fun stuff. I want to appreciate and acknowledge Jillian's great work, I think in starting to pick apart some of those challenges. But honestly, if y'all could get like a hydrogen fueling station program set up in the next 2 to 3 years, I would be very happy. So.
Yeah. And then Jennifer, I see a couple comments in the chat. The risk already kind of named around significant resources, and I think you're getting to some of those pieces. Do you want to lift up that? And then I guess for solution oriented, like how would you advise kind of Odo to be thinking about mitigating that risk?
It shouldn't be a uniform standard. I just don't think that makes sense in light of how utilities are set up in Oregon and the number of small consumer-owned utilities and the types of data systems. The city of Drain is not going to have anything like a PGE, and nor should they make those types of investments. It just doesn't make any sense. So I guess there needs to be some sort of threshold or something, or a look at, where are the EV penetration, what are the service territories that we should focus this on. So I guess in terms of trying to be more constructive, it can't be just laid down as a statewide thing.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'll point out that here, the way that we framed it, it explicitly says IOUs really for that reason. And we don't have kind of the accompanying recommendation or kind of train of thought that we've been having, but we have been thinking about COUs and whether there's more of a capacity building, function needed there.
Okay,
but-
thank you. Thank you. I see that now. I'm sorry I didn't read it closely.
That's all right. When you say thresholds, what are the considerations around threshold? And maybe the question's already answered because of what you just said, Edith, but.
Right, it sounds like it is tailored, it's not uniform statewide. I just was focusing on uniform state standards, but it's really focused on investor-owned utilities, which I guess they're of the size where, that would be more practical, and they have those sort of systems that could maybe accommodate this already. I don't know, but I'm just thinking of some of my, we have one city-owned utility that's very small that just doesn't have that level of sophistication, so.
Yep, thank you. Shannon?
I think that both of these two are commendable and necessary. Recognize that it's a heavy lift also for our IOUs to do that. I mean, it's not simple to upgrade. So I'm thinking back to the time when we had national lab support that was really well funded and we had to laid off NREL employees. And maybe aspirationally, there's a goal for the state to promote, along with our neighboring partners. We have utilities that have service territories in multiple states. We have transportation corridors. Washington is investing in hydrogen and California is invested in hydrogen. Is there some way that we can leverage those efforts so we don't have to reinvent the wheel? So I think that it's kind of, I think that ODO can play a really great role potentially in helping to coordinate those efforts, establish standards that make sense for that accessibility, and provide those kinds of glide paths for everyone, investor and utilities included, to reasonably meet those standards.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. It feels like that kind of theme around not requiring without a real analysis of capacity and glide path and kind of how do you get there, kind of came up in a few of these sections. So we only have a couple of minutes left. Rebecca?
Thank you. Rebecca Smith, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. I just wanted to add that I think it's important to remember that there's also the potential for an equity dimension to hosting capacity mapping. And that would be great if we could incorporate that into any recommendations. And by that, I mean that there's an opportunity to see, where circuits might end up being fully subscribed, so to speak, and, helping save some capacity for some of the lower income folks who might be later adopting, perhaps home EV charging or solar panels, but perhaps also to help better distribute the costs of new upgrades needed once a circuit is full, to everyone earlier in the queue, so to speak. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we have 1 minute left, so maybe we can move to the next step. We're not going to solve all the complexities of our national and federal landscape and state legislative challenges
In 1 minute.
in 1 minute.
Everybody here is really smart, but even so. All right, so I just want to signal that we're kind of at the point where we're wrapping up the really intense public engagement we've been undergoing over the past several months, and we just really need to sit down and digest everything that we've heard. And we also received a bunch of written comments also from many of you and your organizations. And we're working through all of that. So we're sort of entering that drafting stage in mid-June. We don't have a date yet. We plan to put out a draft for public comment and hold a webinar to kind of present what we have in there and where we landed and why. And I think today's discussion, for me anyway, I can speak for myself, I hope also for the team, has been really helpful because I think that you all are pointing out really important things. This is really tough work. It's hard to put the full kind of range of things on a slide, but I think we put up just enough to have a really robust discussion and hear a lot of perspectives. So just really appreciate your time. The next meeting we have scheduled is for June 18th. We envision, stay tuned on that meeting date and also on when exactly we're going to come out with the drafts. We need to work out the exact time frame, but the general one is mid to late June to release the draft for public comment. So thanks very much. Really appreciate you all showing up and contributing to the conversation.
All right. Well, as the slide says, thank you. Great conversation. Appreciate everyone's time. And I can't tell if I can read it. 12:01, not bad. All right, let's adjourn the meeting. Thanks for everybody. Have a great day.